Hey there, Jules from Crocoblock is here, and welcome to the WordPress Agency Summit. The topic of the summit is fast dynamic sites. We will discuss whether the lazy loading is the procrastinating dream, can you cache everything, including your sanity, can cutting the plugins break your heart? But actually, we will discuss all the topics related to the optimization, caching, and speeding up the website. We will have 9 WordPress experts that will share with us their experience in the broadcast format. But actually, in a couple of days after this summit, we will have the playlist on our YouTube channel. So please, my favorite spell, like, share, and subscribe. So guys, please prepare your questions for our following discussion. Please ask some questions in chat. So let's go!
Hello and welcome to this presentation. I am Jean-Baptiste, but people call me JB. That's much more easier. I'm French. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WP Media, which is the company behind WP Rocket, our caching plugin, web performance plugin for WordPress. We have also Imagify and Rocket CDN. Today, the idea is to present you some information about web performance. The idea for me is to explain you a few things about web performance because unfortunately, and maybe fortunately for us, web performance is not really known. There are a lot of information, but sometimes, it's a bit complex. Web performance is a bit complex, not that much complex, but in order for you to understand correctly web performance and how at the end, you can make your website faster, you need to understand a few things and a few basic technical things. So that's where we're going to go into that presentation. I'm briefly going to talk about core web vitals as well, which is pretty important these days, let's say. And I'm going to show you a few practical things on how you can improve your performance on your WordPress website. So let me start presenting my, sharing my screen. That should work, hopefully. So very quickly, our biggest product, let's say, is WP Rocket. And today we have more than 4 million websites using WP Rocket. So it's, in other words, we have one new website every 40 seconds, which is added to WP Rocket. We have been seeing a phenomenal growth since many years, and we have learned a few things about running this amount of website with one plugin, and we have been learning a few things about web performance as well, because that's really the core of what we do. All the time, when we are talking about web performance these days, all the time people are talking about core web vitals, because the classic way of doing things is you have websites, you want to test the web performance, or you are going to test through Google Page Speed, which is going to talk about core web vitals, which is extremely interesting, extremely technical, I would say, at a point, but that's not necessarily the most important things to know about web performance, because, and that's going to be my point, it's really most important to know and to apply the basics of web performance, which would have a big impact on core web vitals, instead of just focusing on core web vitals and not necessarily understanding what it means at the end. So my first things would be to let's talk first about basics of web performance, and more importantly is how Google has changed, let's say, his vision, or let's say the way they measure and they display, they show if a website is performant or not. So a long time ago, when we started WP Rocket in 2014, Google was more or less only measuring good practice. So they have their page speed score, and at that point, page speed score was only measuring good practices. And when I mean good practices, they were measuring, like, for example, the number of requests you had on a website, what are the image formats you have, what is your cache policy, do you have JZip compression, but they were no measuring at all the real performance of the website at that point, which was like how much time a website takes to load, or what is the perception of the performance of a website. They were only measuring good practices. And on our vision, that was pretty bad because you could have like super perfect websites with only good practice implemented, so not that much number of requests, great image formats, you had JZip compression, you had everything that was Google measuring at that point. So technically you have like 100 in terms of score, but your website could have been super slow, like taking forever to load because your PHP code, let's say, was super bad. And I mean, you could have almost 100% performance score with a website which would take like 10 seconds to load. And we have been quite vocal about, and directly also to our customers, that they shouldn't care about web performance score. But fortunately, web performance score has changed, and now they are way more interesting to measure on our vision. And so slowly, so we've been very vocal about that. I think you can find a lot of blog posts and a lot of communication we did about how bad Google PageSpeed was at the time. Today, it's way more better, and it's really good today. And with time, I mean, Google has been moving when measuring performance of websites. They have been adding real metrics, like the metrics of a website. So they use first the FCP and the TTFB. So the FCP is how much, and they were measuring how much time the first content of a website is being displayed. So basically, when you have something displayed on a screen, because at the time, like the way we were badly creating website is like your website was like white, and you wait like 2 seconds, and after everything was loaded, poof, it was displaying everything, which now has changed quite a lot. So they were displaying in how much time the border is able to display something, like a header, an image, whatever. And the TTFB is basically, so the time to first byte is basically how much time like the server is answering the website. And so the TTFB is how much server is answering the request. And so we've been that change being introduced by Google by adding more real metrics, let's say, and with time they finally move to user experience, which is great and core vital. So the user experience is exactly what you should target for your user. Is like a user visiting a website, what is the perception of the speed, what is being displayed on the website in how much time, and that's where the performance goes now, is like we obviously try to improve everything, but we try to improve everything which is directly displayed to the user in his browser. Everything which is above the fold, which is displayed directly, we try to super optimize to display it as soon as possible. And everything which is below the fold, we don't care in a way, because the user don't really see it right away because he had to scroll. So we can catch when the user is scrolling in order to display a lot of things. So that's what we try, and what the whole performance move is trying to optimize what is directly displayed to the user and try to predict what the user is going to see next in order to preload, pre-render this kind of stuff. And so more than just talking about theoretical things, I believe you are here in order to get information about how you can have practical solution for your WordPress, because usually the classic way is like you have created a WordPress website. And I don't know, maybe so you're an agency and your customer is saying, hey, I don't have 100% on page speed, or it looks like my website is slow. How can I do it? And so there are a few things that we're going to talk. I believe the first really extremely important thing, and it's really the basic, is like the hosting. Because you can have a perfect website in terms of optimization. It can be super light, optimized, but if your hosting is really bad, this will never work, never. So that would be my very first recommendation, is make sure to choose the proper hosting. And I mean, it's a two things to choose. Is first the proper company who is going to host your website. So we don't have really specific recommendation, except that don't go to really low cost hosting. And also the other thing is make sure that the package you are taking, so the plan you are taking on your hosting is according to the number of visits you have. Because you can have a great hosting company, but if you are taking the super low package, the first package, but you have a high traffic website and big websites, that will never work. So first make sure about that. Then there are a lot of things that people are talking is, I mean, does number of plugins affect the performance of my website? So answer is yes and no. I mean, if you have 1,000 plugins which does nothing to your website, I mean, who don't add new JavaScript file, let's say, or doesn't have impact on the front end of your website, this won't have any kind of impact or very minimal impact on the performance of our website. But with only one or two plugins, which would bring tons of JavaScript, ton of PHP, ton of database requests, that would impact very negatively the website. So the wise things to do regarding number of plugins is trying to reduce as much as possible. I mean, to really think about, okay, if you don't need right now this plugin, just disable it and delete it, because in most of the case that would have an impact on the performance of your website. And sometimes you can, like, if you have the ability to code some things, and which is a very small need, and maybe a plugin can answer that need, that might worth it to really directly integrate on your side and to code what is needed, versus like having a plugin who do tons of other things, but which would have an impact about performance. And that the thing about web performance is mostly a question of balance. About, okay, all the features or all the things I'm going to add to my website is going necessary to impact my performance. So what should we do, and how we can optimize what we have? The other things we necessarily recommend is a caching plugin. I'm going to talk specifically about caching plugin, but honestly, it's really necessary. So we have WP Rocket, but there are tons of other solutions which are great outside. And in any case, I would recommend a caching plugin. And that's our way to go, is as soon as you have a WordPress website, make sure to have a caching plugin. And especially because now caching plugin don't do only caching, but all the web performance optimization, which is necessary for your users, for Google. So yeah, it's like necessary. The other thing is image optimization. It's really super simple to have. We do provide Imagify, which allow you to optimize a few images per month for free, and then if you need more, you can pay for more usage. And it's really also necessary, because I think 60% of the size of a page is just images. So if you're able to reduce the size of these images without reducing the quality, which is what we do, it's just a win for you, for how much image you store, and for your users, because that's going to make the load way more faster. The last thing, I mean, there are way more other things, but the last thing that I'm going to quickly talk about is CDN. Lots of people think that CDN is really necessary. That's wrong. So for the people who don't know, CDN is a way to store all the assets, the static assets of your website. So static asset is mostly like images, CSS, JavaScript on your website everywhere on the world. So that's very useful, because technically your website is hosted in a certain point geographically speaking. So let's say my website is in Paris, I have visitor in Paris or in France. The distance is really small, so everything is loading super fast. But let's say now I have user from US, and US from Paris is taking a bit of time. So that would be way more interesting to have point of presence of my assets directly in US. So that's what a CDN is providing. But if you are like in Europe and most of the visitors are in Europe, no need to have a CDN. However, as soon as you have international, or if you're in US, because US is way more bigger than Europe, that's probably needed. So there are a lot of information about, and I mean, a lot of question, a lot of content about what is caching, and most of the people don't really know what is caching, and the fact is there are different kind of cache, which makes things way more complex for people to understand. So I'm going to first trying to introduce what is caching in the global sense, and then we're going to quickly go into the details of every kind of caching we can have into our websites. So the definition of caching is really simple, and I'm going to give you a practical example. So, I mean, we're not in live, so no one is going to be able to answer that question. But let's imagine we are in live, and I'm going to ask what is the result of 95 multiplied by 26. No one probably will know, and people will open the phone, check the calculation, do the calculation on their calculation app, and provide the answer. And it will take probably 20 seconds. And if a few seconds after I'm going to re-ask that question again, people will be able to give that answer in like 1 second, because they do remember immediately what is the answer of that. However, if I'm going to ask in 2 weeks, we would do to the same process. So that's exactly what is caching. So caching is, the definition of caching is store temporary an information. And usually the information is like something which need calculation, which takes times to generate. So you see the information, you see the value of caching is, sometimes we always do the same calculation, and we don't technically need to redo that calculation because sometimes it may change like once a day. But if we have like hundreds of visitors in the same hours doing the exact same calculation, that doesn't make sense to redo it again. So we say, okay, let's keep that information for 1 hour or 1 day, or it's on our side to define, and then display it directly. And so now that I hope that you understand what is cache, I mean the pure definition of cache, let's say. So I'm going to repeat it again: store temporary and information. We're going to see how this does imply websites, and how we can what we do on website regarding caching, and we'll see how much different kind of cache we have. There are way more that I'm going to present, but for the simplicity of this presentation, the timing of this presentation, I'm going to just present a few one. So the first one is browser cache. So as the name suggests, this is a cache which is stored directly on your browser, on the browsers of all the visitors of a specific website. So it's easy to understand, hopefully, way more, and it's super simple to set up. So basically, the idea, it's the server, so where your website is hosted, when he's going to deliver files, so let's say in images, he's going to put a specific headers on the images to give instruction to the browser to say, you need to store this file for a specific time. So usually we say like, okay, keep this file, keep these images into your memory, so into the browser cache for like 60 days, because I mean, we are delivering an image with a specific name, and we don't expect the image with this specific name to change. So there is no reason for the browser to just all the time ask the server the image again. So, but this may change. So that's why usually we don't put unlimited time. So we say, okay, during 60 days, keep it into your cache, into the browser cache, and don't ask the server again, which is a big win for everyone because it's directly on the browser, so it's displayed automatically. There is no bandwidth consumed, there is no server consumption. So it's very effective. So this can be done only for like what we call static assets again. So images, CSS, JavaScript. And what you need to understand, which is extremely important, is the way it's stored. It's a bit more complex, but to make things simpler, let's say. So when you use a storage system, it's what we call usually a key and a value. So the key is the name. So that's where the border is going to ask the content of the image. So let's say we have an image on a website, because it's really per website, the cache, which is called like test.jpg. So test.jpg is a key, and the value is like the content of the image itself. And so the border will say, okay, the browser will say, okay, do I have test.jpg into my border cache for this specific website? Yes, I have it, so I'm going to display it. But you might understand this may be an issue. Let's imagine you are going to upload a new image called test.jpg, which is accessible in the exact same URL, but you are going to upload a new image. Usually this happens mostly for like style. So let's imagine you change the style of your website, the CSS of your website, and you have the name called style.css, and you just change the content and you put on your server, and you don't understand why your browser don't see the reflection, because that's simply because of cache. And that's why usually people say, hey, have you cleared the cache? And that's because of that, because the name is exactly the same, style.css. The value has changed, but the border doesn't know that the value has changed. The content of the file has changed. So he will keep it into the border for like 60 days, depending on the instruction we have given. And that's where, but we have a solution for that. We can simply change a little bit the name. So for that, we use versioning. So since the name is changed, the border won't have into his cache anymore. So that's why usually, when you do change into like style.css or any kind of file, you put at the end like what we call a query string, which is like interrogation mark version something. So I'm going to write it to make it easier. So usually you are going to load something which is something 1. So which means that let's say that's the version 1. This can be anything we want. So as soon as you do some change into the style.css, you are going to change this number. So the browser has a new file, so a new key. So he's going to generate to not have into his border cache anymore. So that's the trick, let's say, we're using. However, this trick can't be used for HTML. I mean, the full HTML, because it doesn't technically has a name, so you can't change it, which means that it's extremely important to never cache the full HTML. I mean, I'm talking specifically about browser cache, because we have all the way of caching that. So this is extremely easy to set up. It's just a few instructions you give to your server. Usually that goes to the htaccess or nginx rules. And I would say at least WP Rocket, but most of the other caching plugins do. Everything is automatic as soon as you enable, for example, WP Rocket. We put the good instruction for the border, or if you're using a CDN, that's usually the same. The second cache I'm going to talk about is like static cache. Static cache is what usually has the biggest impact in terms of performance. So you need to understand how a WordPress website is working. I mean, when let's say you are going to display the homepage of a WordPress website. So the border is requesting a specific page, and WordPress through PHP and MySQL, we say, okay, this user is asking the homepage. Is this user connected? If not, we are going to display something different. Okay, we need to get all the content of the homepage. We do a lot of calculation. We do a lot of MySQL database, let's say, request. And then we display the content. And this takes forever if you want something extremely fast. I mean, usually like 2 or 3 seconds, or a bit less probably. But it's too much, and usually, like your home page, if you're not connected, is always the same. So it doesn't by nature have to be dynamic. So the idea of static cache and what does WP Rocket and all the caching plugin is just take all the HTML which is generated by WordPress and store it directly. So this is a cache. We are storing it. And when another user is visiting the website, we simply show the cache directly, so the HTML which has been rendered. So there are no more PHP, there are no more MySQL, and we are simply serving a simple HTML file, which takes like probably, I don't know, 50 milliseconds to serve it. So that's a huge impact on it. What is hard then is to like making sure the cache is properly cleared, because if you update some content, if you update your WordPress, this needs to be updated. So that's a big work of the caching plugin, making sure to clear everything which is needed. Another thing you can implement, so it's really more for the developers, is WP cache, because WordPress has native cache. So it's simply like a function, let's say, which allow you to store specific information without like creating specific database entries. And so for that, there are two main things. The first thing is object cache, but object cache is very, very specific, and my advice is most of the time don't use it. I mean, unless you really know what you do. So basically, the object cache will store only for the time of a request the data that you have set. So you can use mostly, there are other functions, but the main one are like WP cache set, where you put information into the cache with a key and the data and how much it should expire, and WP cache get to retrieve the data. However, this storage is extremely ephemeral, because as soon as you refresh a page, basically the storage has been deleted. So it's really not needed. So there are very specific use cases if you are inside a function to have access outside. But I mean, if you're a developer, I mean, basically it's using global. So if you're outside of the scope of the functions that allow you to retrieve it without recalculating. But as you understand, that's really not necessarily needed. However, there is a great solution, which is you can delegate the store of the cache to not having directly into the PHP memory, but to having into Redis or Memcache or whatever, and you have specific plugin for that. I think there is Redis cache, something like that, which allow you to store the content of WP cache, which is extremely efficient, and which allow you to have a real cache with real expiration that you can set. And the other thing which is mostly used is transients. So it's a way to store something very specific into the database. So usually you can use transient to like store the value of a calculation you have done into the database. For example, a very real example of how we're using it is, so for example, on WP Rocket homepage, we're displaying the number of websites that is using WP Rocket. In order to have that, so basically into our database, we are using website is a custom post type. And in order to like having the full numbers of website, we simply ask WordPress how much entries do we have into these custom post types. This takes a lot of time because there are some big MySQL requests to do that, because we do some exclusion in the same time. And so the good solution in order to do that is like to do it once and to save the answer, like this number of websites, directly into a transient. So for that, we use set transient and get transients. At the end, it's stored into the database, but it's only one small request, and you don't have to do the whole calculation. So make sure, like, if you do kind of calculation, like database request or external request, let's say you are fetching some data from an external API, it's really a good idea to store the answer, the results, directly into a transient. So I initially wanted to go very quickly into Core Vitals. The thing is, I'm out of time. So I'm voluntarily skipping the core vitals because I don't want to just present in 2 minutes, because that require more time. So maybe I can do a specific talk about what is core vitals, but just a few advice. So let's say you have a website and you want to make it faster, and I mean you done a few things. You have installed the caching plugins. You did a few things. And you want to know how you can make it faster. So basically you are going to do a Core Vital score or page speed score, which would give you the Core Vitals. My advice is do it. It's extremely important to measure what you do to see the results of that. And way more important is not just check the score, because the score is important, but what is important is what is page speed giving you as advice, as recommendation, because this will help you understand what is specifically wrong into my website and how I can address that. Because if you just have the number, you won't know what you can do. So make sure to read all the page speed with report, and specifically all the details. It's extremely important. Not necessarily related to the core vitals, but as a main things to improve the performance of your website is making sure you use web performance, making sure to clean your WordPress. By cleaning your WordPress, making sure that you don't store too much information, and if the things you store which is not needed, make sure that you delete them. Make sure that you don't have multiple plugins who do the same thing. Make sure to use only one plugin for the same things. I mean, might sounds weird, but I've seen website with like probably 3 or 4 contact form enabled in the same time, but they're using only one. However, the 3 contact form was directly putting their JavaScript and their CSS in all the pages, so which was not used. So there is really no point of doing that. Make sure to use web performance plugin. I mean, it can be WP Rocket. There are plenty of other solutions, but it's really necessary. It's really not good to use WordPress without a web performance plugin. Not because of WordPress, but because of all the themes, everything you are going to add at the end. If you take blank WordPress with the official themes, probably you don't necessarily need it, even if that would bring some improvements. But as soon as you have specific things, you really need it. And last thing is making sure that you optimize your images. It's really simple to do. It's really cheap to do. Doesn't have any kind of negative impact. It's a no-brainer to do. So make sure you do it. And that's more or less all. I mean, there are tons of things you should do for improving your web performance. There are things on the backend, on the server optimization. There are things on the PHP optimization, how you code specific things. The big thing as well is like front-end optimization. So it's a big subject, and if you want, like, let's say a perfect website, all this should be covered. And usually, I mean, depending on your research, but it's pretty hard to do. So making sure that to cover everything you can with web performance plugin, or like having, if you are a developer or if you do hire developer, making sure that they are aware about good practices regarding web performance in the globality, making sure that you can train them, you can give them information. There are plenty of good information about web performance. So yeah, training is really necessary. Go to specific performance webinar in order to learn new things, and I hope that you did learn new things. So thanks a lot for watching it. I hope that you did enjoy, you did learn a few things. Was super happy to do that. So thanks for the invitation, and see you very soon.
Hey everyone, what's up? My name is Moeez, and I am super excited today to be at the WP Summit hosted by CrocoBlock. I think the team has done a fantastic job in organizing this online event, and I'm grateful for them to be giving me this opportunity today and to speak with you about digital agencies, hosting, WordPress, and whatnot. So today I'm going to be using this opportunity to speak with digital agencies in particular. And the topic of my session today is the impact of scalable hosting solutions on the success of digital agencies. Now, before we move on, I just wanted to start off with a short introduction about myself. I am the head of community here at Cloudways, and we are a managed cloud hosting solution that caters primarily to SMBs and digital agencies. I think you might have gotten the hint of why I chose this particular topic to speak on today. So, before we move on to what scalable hosting solutions are and why they are important, let's start from the basic stuff, right? I mean, and this is sort of my agenda for today. I just summarized what I will be speaking on in my session today, and starting off with why hosting is important. I think most of you might already know the answer to that, but just to build up or towards the scalable hosting solution part, why hosting is important, what is a traditional hosting solution and what are the challenges, and then moving on to scalable hosting solutions and what are the benefits and how agencies can use scalable hosting solutions for their success. So why does it matter for hosting for digital agencies to have a quality hosting provider? Well, first of all, speed and uptime. I mean, if you are a digital agency, your clients will always expect high performances, will always expect maximum uptime. I mean, obviously, if it's an e-commerce store, they will never tolerate downtime because that's their bread and butter, right? uh, Second point, security and backups, right? I mean, if you run a survey of all your clients and ask that if they are willing to compromise on the security of their website, I'm not sure, or I am pretty confident that none of them will agree to that, because security and backups are so important for every website out there, right? And reliable support, and this point is more important for you as a digital agency rather than your client, because we often underestimate how regularly we need a reliable support agent, right? I mean, you need support more often than you think, and having a reliable support that always have your back is invaluable. I mean, you can't put a price on that. Finally, scalability and flexibility. I will get on that later on in my presentation, but just to give you a gist of why scalability and flexibility is important for you as a digital agency, because you need a hosting solution that grows with you, right? I mean, you are busy acquiring more clients and you don't want to worry about your hosting provider while you do that, right? I mean, you want to focus on getting more clients, you want to focus on getting more sales, you want to focus on acquiring more users, while being very free about how your hosting is going to handle all those things, right? So you have to make sure that your hosting provider is scalable first, and then it's flexible as well. Flexibility allows you to have a hosting provider that is suitable for needs of every client that you have. I mean, if you have 100 clients, it's a good chance that almost all of them will have needs that are different, right? And if you have a hosting provider that is rigid, you may find it difficult to acquire those clients. So you need to have a hosting provider that is flexible and scalable at the same time. Now, moving on to challenges of having a traditional hosting solution, right? I mean, I get it. I mean, you have a shared hosting environment because it saves you a lot of money. And when you look at your books, it might feel like it's a good decision. But when you talk about growth and when you talk about how serious you are about your own digital agency, you need to consider these factors before you choose a traditional hosting solution, right? You need to make sure that you're thinking about scalability, because a shared hosting environment is not scalable. It won't grow with you, it won't grow with your business. It has zero automation, right? You will be doing a lot of stuff manually that is going to take up a lot of your time. that you may be investing in getting more clients, right? I mean, you don't want to get your hands dirty fixing your server, getting your client side backup. I mean, you don't want to do that. I mean, you want to automate all of those things and focus on growing your business. And finally, as we all know, subpar performance and security. So traditional hosting solutions are not primarily known for, or they're not famous for having top-notch security or top-notch performance, right? So challenges of traditional hosting solutions, you need to make sure that you take these into account before making a decision. So moving on to the meat of this presentation, the most important part. What exactly is a scalable hosting solution? I mean, we know that there is a dedicated environment. We know that there are shared hosting solution providers, and then there is a cloud hosting solution provider. But what exactly do I mean when I say that a hosting solution should be scalable? And to answer this question, uh, I have these 4 pointers over here, right? It allows users to scale your resources and as and when needed, right? I mean, so you have like 100 clients, 200 clients, and all of them obviously have different periods in throughout the year where they may face traffic surges, right? Where they may face different situations where they need resources to be either increased or decreased. A scalable hosting solution allows you to do that in a matter of minutes, right? I mean, you don't have to go into the backend and do it yourself. If it has an intuitive platform, a user-friendly interface, a scalable hosting solution will allow you to scale your hosting resources in a matter of minutes. Because the scalable hosting solution is hosted on a cloud infrastructure, it allows for higher performance and security, right? Cloud infrastructures are best known for providing performance results and rock solid security. So it's always a good idea to have a scalable hosting solution because of these two reasons alone. High flexibility to tailor fit demands of your clients. I mean, I spoke about flexibility a couple of slides back, and it's important to have a hosting provider that tailor fits to different clients that you have in your portfolio, right? I mean, you may have an e-commerce store, you may have a client who has a brochure website, you may have a client that runs an e-commerce store, you may have a client that runs a gaming website. So a scalable solution fits all of those needs effortlessly. So you have to make sure that the hosting solution that you have is flexible. And lastly, auto scaling. So auto scaling is sort of I won't say it's a new technology in the market, but people are still getting used to it. People are still adapting to it, and auto scaling sort of is one step ahead of what scalable solutions are, right? And what it does is basically it ensures that your performance remains stable, your website remains up during unexpected traffic surges, right? So and that is mostly common with e-commerce stores, right? Because when they are running a sales promotion, when they are running Facebook ads, when there is a holiday season coming up, which is just a couple of months ahead. So during these times, these e-commerce stores, face traffic surges. They face traffic on their websites that they normally don't do, right? And that is when uh, your clients need a solution that automatically handles all that extra traffic without affecting performance, without affecting site speed, without affecting uptime. So that is what auto scaling basically does. And having that in your repertoire, having that in your arsenal will make you a digital agency, to be a competitive digital agency that usually uh, other digital agencies are not. So you have to make sure that you have all these 4 pointers noted down, and consider these pointers when you're selecting a hosting solution after this session. So very important to make sure that your hosting solution is scalable, flexible, and if it has auto scalable capabilities, it definitely will give you an edge. Now let's talk about digital agencies in particular. Like, what are the benefits of having scalable hosting solutions for digital agencies specifically? So you have auto scaling, as I mentioned before, results in maximum uptime, right? So consider that you have a client who has never had his site down or their site down uh, ever since they have been your client, right? And imagine what they will do to their trust level. Imagine what it will do to their trust level that they have on you as a digital agency, right? So you have to make sure that auto scaling is something that you have in today's time. I think it's very important that you have auto scaling solution in your arsenal. It's cost effective. I mean, from a bird's eye view, it may seem like auto scalable solution or scalable solutions are more expensive. It doesn't allow you for a better profit margin. And if you're charging, for example, $12, $13, or even $25 per month from your client, they may seem like they're overpaying for their hosting solution, and it may end up increasing your bill to a significant level. But it's actually not that much, because you pay for only what you use, right? I mean, your clients are paying for the resources that they're utilizing, and as an agency owner, it is your responsibility, it is your duty to communicate that to your clients. I mean, clients may not see it as important as it is. I mean, they may value cost and money over everything else, and that makes sense in today's macroeconomic environment. But I think and I believe that as an agency owner, it is your responsibility to communicate that to your client, that you only pay for what you use. I mean, you don't have to pay a fixed amount every month, and that is what makes scalable hosting solutions so cost effective. And if you want, obviously, as an agency owner, you would want your clients to have all the necessary technology that they can to make sure that their site is up all the time, so that they're not ringing your phone at the middle of the night if their website site goes down, right? And I think, to save yourself even from that hassle, you need to make sure that you communicate this message to your clients, that scalable hosting solutions are the way to go. Again, I will repeat this again and again. I think this is the third time that I'm saying this. Uh, it 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 it's something that no client or no site owner will compromise on, which is performance, right? So a scalable hosting solution is something that you can use to guarantee performance to your clients. And again, as with the first point, it will definitely result in an increased level of trust uh, within your clients. Automation, I mean, nowadays you have to make sure that you use your time as effectively as you use your money, right? So you have to make sure that you you have the necessary automations in place, and scalable hosting solutions does provide that, right? I mean, I work for Cloudways, and I can tell you 10 automations that we provide to our customers and agency customers, that they can use to save time, that they can use to save their time, that they will be instead using to grow their business, to get more clients, and to gather more business, right? I mean, and that is what our aim at Cloudways is, that to make sure that our customers, who are mainly digital agencies, focus on increasing their portfolio, getting more clients, and increasing their profits, rather than spending time on managing their servers, which obviously results in peace of mind, which is one of our values as well. So as an agency owner, you need to make sure that for the peace of you for your own sake, for the peace of your own mind, you choose a hosting solution that automates a lot of redundant tasks, and then as a result, leaving you with more time to deal with clients and get more acquisitions, right? And it's a win-win for both. I mean, as I explained earlier, that how it is cost effective for your clients, and how it will be time effective for you if you choose a scalable hosting solution, right? So for you, it's saving you time, and for your clients, it's saving you a lot of money. And again, if even then, if your client chooses to go for a shared hosting solution, you need to explain to them that the money that you're saving on hosting solutions, you will end up spending double that amount if your site goes down, right? I mean, you will end up losing double that amount of money if your site goes down in the future because of a subpar hosting solution, right? So you need to get this message across to your clients, that a scalable hosting solution may seem that you're overpaying. And again, I would say it may seem that you're overpaying, but it is saving you a lot of money. It is saving you a lot of time in the future, in the long run, because you will never have performance issues, you will never have downtime issues, and it will save you a lot of instances where you can incur losses, right? So these are some of the things that you need to make sure that you communicate to your clients very clearly. How a scalable hosting solution is flexible, and how that flexibility is adaptable to your agency growth, right? A scalable hosting solution is a partner in growth. As I mentioned before, a traditional hosting solution is not, right? So what a traditional hosting solution does is basically it restricts you from growing, right? It can only grow so much that it can allow you to go from A to B, not from B to Z, right? You will have to make sure that you choose a hosting solution that can take you the mile, right? That can take you a long way in terms of your growth. And again, it will save you the hassle of moving to another hosting provider when your client faces traffic or bandwidth issues, right? So the time and the money that you will spend on moving from one hosting provider to another, you can save that time and money by choosing a reliable hosting provider, a scalable hosting solution in the start, so that you don't spend that time and money, you don't waste that time and money in the future, right? And that is what I'm trying to communicate over here with this slide, is that a scalable and a reputable hosting solution for your digital agency will save you time and money in the future. It will save you time and money in the long run, and that is the same for your client as well. As an agency owner, you can focus on selling your services to your clients without worrying about outgrowing your hosting solution, right? So again, as I mentioned before, a scalable hosting solution grows with your business. It doesn't stop you from growing. It doesn't restrict your growth. And if you have a scalable hosting solution, you will work on growth strategies. You will work on growing your business rather than thinking about if my hosting solution is going to be my partner in growth, or will it not be, right? So I think this is over here at this point in time. If you are a digital agency looking for growth, if you're a digital agency that is just starting off, you need to make sure that you choose a hosting provider that can be with you in the long run, not a hosting provider that will sort of save you a couple of bucks, a couple of $100 in the first month or the second month, and then after that you will be left deciding which hosting provider to jump on after that. So that will be a waste of time for you as well, and for your clients too. So just to further validate my point on why scalable hosting solutions are important. So we had this SEO, this digital agency called Guru SEO, all right, and they decided to jump on Cloudways a couple of years ago. And it's basically a digital agency that provides design services and marketing services in Alberta, Canada. And they moved to Cloudways a couple of years ago, and after that they sort of uh, they saw results that they didn't before. I mean, the clients that they had uh, experienced massive success at a scale where they couldn't imagine it a few years ago. I mean, they had a website. It was a crypto portfolio website, and that they saw a 400% increase in ROI on that website, because they moved to a reliable hosting solution that could that gave them the performance that they were expecting, the uptime that they were expecting, that they didn't had before, right? So I would highly recommend that you read the full case study that I have linked in this slide over here, so that you can get an idea of how digital agencies are moving to scalable hosting solutions, are moving to cloud hosting solutions that can be beneficial for them first, and that can also be beneficial for their clients as well. So that is something that I wanted to just communicate over here, a case study, and we have tens of other case studies just like these over here, but due to the restriction of time, I can't share all of them over here. But if once you go to the page that I have linked over here, you will find many other success stories that we have, where digital agencies from all around the world switch to cloud solutions and experienced success themselves as well, and their clients in return experienced success as well. So lastly, what is the future of scalable hosting, right? I mean, we are standing in 2024, it's about to end. And what can we say about what's the future of scalable hosting solutions, where this technology will go from here, right? And I personally believe that artificial intelligence, AI, will have a massive input in how scalable hosting solutions evolve from this point on, right? I mean, integration of AI may result in deeper automation. And I spoke about automation before as well. That will result in a more hands-off approach. I mean, right now there are still some of the things that you may have to do manually, but going forward, I think it will all be automated. I mean, you won't have to do anything other than the fact that just put in your credit card, buy a hosting solution, and then leave it at that. It would be completely set and forget, right? And that is my observation. I think that is what will happen in the future. Enhanced security measures, and I think AI will have an input over here as well, where it will automatically detect threats based on its data. It will automatically detect vulnerabilities, and better authentication and verifications will also be a result of that. Green hosting is something that is being talked about this year, and when I think a couple of years ago people were talking about green hosting as well. I think that will become more common in the future because of environmental awareness, and people being more aware of how hosting or servers are impacting the environment through their carbon footprint, right? And I think green hosting is something that will be a huge part of the future, resulting in lesser carbon emission. And I think finally, integrating with popular CMSs such as WordPress and Magento. I think right now there is a lot to be done when it comes to hosting solutions being integrated with WordPress, with Magento, Laravel, and other CMSs that are there in the market. And I think hosting solutions will work on deeper integrations with WordPress, with Magento, and so that they can provide a more tailored approach, more tailored solution to their customers. And obviously WordPress being the biggest CMS out there, I think this would be something that the hosting solutions will look into the future, that how they can provide more tailored approach, more tailored solution to WordPress users, to Magento users, and other popular CMSs out there. So folks, this was all from my end, from my presentation. I'm thankful for CrocoBlock and its team for giving me this opportunity. If you have any questions, you can ask in the chat. I'm available for the next I think 12-13 minutes as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you want to follow me, I've given my LinkedIn profile link. You can follow me over there. Until then, see you.
Hello, my name is Andrew Shevchenko, I'm the CTO of Crocoblock. And at start I will tell just a few words about our company in case you are not familiar with our products. We develop WordPress plugins for various tasks, and our main goal is to create an ecosystem in which the user, with the help of one of our plugins, can create their site from scratch, starting from the website structure to the design of individual pages. We specialize in dynamic content and have developed over 20 plugins that work with Block Editor, Elementor, and Bricks Builder. Today, we'll talk about some basic things. And by basic, I mean the things you probably always do first when starting to work on a new website. So, at the initial stage of building any website, it can be represented as a data model where these operations take place. First one is collecting data, second storing data, and third is retrieving data from the database. Then we move to the second step, and based on this model, we are building an interaction between this data and the user, which includes displaying the stored data on the front end and performing operations with this data on the front end, such as navigation, search, and filtering. On the next steps of website development, we finalized it by refining design of elements and adding things like SEO, analytics, marketing, and so on. And in many ways, the first step defines how fast and optimized the final site will be. If some mistakes are made in the design of the data model in the beginning, then it's very difficult to correct them later. On this topic, I remember the statement of Pippin Williamson, the creator of Easy Digital Downloads and many other plugins. Unfortunately, it was a long time ago and I couldn't find the original source. Anyway, the idea of the statement was that Pippin considered one of the biggest mistakes in the early stages of EDD development to be using a post plus post meta storage for handling orders and other EDD service entities. Over time, EDD developers were able to overcome this problem and separate this data from default posts. WooCommerce is facing a similar problem, and they have been working for a long time on moving orders from storage in post plus post meta tables to high performance order storage with separate tables. These examples show how crucial it is to organize your data structure properly from the start. So, in this presentation, I will do my best to share recommendations on how to organize your data structure correctly and avoid mistakes. The first thing we should clarify is what data we need and where we need to have it. As an example, let's take the simplest case of an event agency website where people can view events and register for them. Here we have two entities, an event and a participant in the event. The event is an entity that should be displayed on the front end because users need to see a list of all events and register for them. The participant is an entity that only the website administrator should have access to, and in the basic case, there is no need to show it anywhere on the front end. So we came to the conclusion that some data may be required both on the front end and in the back end, while other data may be needed only in the admin area. So our first task is to organize the data in a way that the entities needed only in the admin area doesn't affect the performance of the front end. And now the next question here will be what tools at all do we have to store data? In WordPress, these options are available. Custom post types plus post meta, then custom taxonomies plus churn meta, then users plus user meta, then options, and finally custom database tables. Let's return to our example of events and participants. It's clear that events should be stored as a custom post type plus post meta since we need single event page, archives, search capabilities, and so on. And the custom post types plus post meta combo is most suited for this kind of logic in WordPress. And what about participants? In the real world, each event is likely to have several participants, and the total number of them will be much larger than the number of events. The simplest approach is to store participants as custom post type plus post meta as well. However, in this case, first, we would store some unnecessary information about each participant that's only need for WordPress internal logic. Considering the fact that the number of participants will be much larger than the number of events, this would significantly increase the overall size of the database. And second, participants and events would be stored in the same database. And this increasing the size of these tables and slowing down queries to fetch events on the front end. So we discard this option. Custom taxonomies plus churn meta also won't work. While in theory, based on data structure, these tables could be suitable, they won't fit from a logical standpoint. In WordPress, taxonomies and terms are intended to group custom post types, and the entire admin UI is designed around this concept. Options are also clearly not suitable, as this table isn't meant to store collections of similar data like we need in this case. Users plus user meta is a possible option, especially if we create a specific role for participants. However, the problem here is the same as for post meta. It's storing a lot of unnecessary default meta fields that WordPress core adds for every user. This leaves us with the last option, which also happens to be the best one: custom tables. We can create a table with the exact set of columns we need and store all the data in a single table, which won't impact the size of other tables in our database. Let's look at the numbers to see if they support our assumptions. I simulated different data structure options for a website with 100 events and 1000 participants. Here what we found. In the case of custom post types plus post meta, we get big posts and post meta tables, and that will affect the speed of all database queries related to posts. In the case of users plus user meta, there are compact tables of post and post meta since only events are stored there. But there is a huge table of user meta because, as I already said, WordPress stores a lot of default metadata for each user. So we will have more optimized queries related to posts, but at the same time there is a decrease in performance in all requests related to users. Also, in the case of users, we have a much larger total size of the database. And as I said, custom table is the best option. It stores only the data we need, which keeps its size minimal. All other tables also maintain the smallest necessary size. As a result, the entire database takes up significantly less space, and all queries will be as fast as possible. If you look at tools which help us to work with custom database tables, in the case of our JetEngine plugin, there is custom content types, on the example of which I did the simulation, and there are also other similar solutions on the market. And as a bonus could be a mixed option. We can store data in the post table, but make separate storage for meta fields. For our example, events metadata we store as usual, while for participants we would place metadata in a separate table. This table is specially designed to store participants' data, and each meta field has its own column. This would reduce the overall size of the database and partially separate event and participant data. This approach is available in JetEngine, Metabox, and not sure maybe in some other similar plugins. As we can see, this option is really something in the middle. Here we have a slightly smaller total database size and a smaller post meta table than when it was stored as a normal post plus post meta combination. But it's not as effective as a totally separate custom table. So now we separated the data, but as I said before, anyway, some of the data we will store as posts because the WordPress core is well optimized for handling it. Here we also face a choice, how to store additional information. There are two options. First is post meta, which stores any additional posts data structured as key value pairs. And second is taxonomies, which essentially classifies posts by various criteria. As we can see, these concepts serve different purposes, but in some cases they can be used similarly. Let's consider our example with events. An event could have a property like event format with options such as in-person, online, or mixed. Technically, we could implement this either as an event format taxonomy or as an event format meta field with a predefined set of options in the UI. So which one should we choose? In theory, you should first differentiate these properties based on their logic. If the property can group posts into specific categories, it should be a taxonomy. If the property provides additional information about the post, it should be a meta field. For example, event format is likely to be a taxonomy, while properties like price, short description, or maximum number of participants should be a meta fields. There are also special cases. For example, the location could be either taxonomy or meta field depending on the specific requirements of the project. But now let's consider this question from the perspective of database structure optimization and query performance. We will use the same example with events agency and let's add three properties: event category, event format, and event type. Each of these logically belongs to taxonomies, but they could also be implemented as meta fields. We will check the efficiency of storing these properties as the taxonomies and meta fields, and we will compare these storage options based on three main criteria. First is overall database size, second is query speed when retrieving a collection of posts by these properties, and third is query speed when retrieving data for a single post. And again, I created two test websites, each of them contains 500 events, each event has one value of each property, and the conclusion by first criteria is that the total size of the database in the case of using the meta fields is smaller, but only slightly smaller. On the other hand, in the case of taxonomies, there is an advantage in separated data storage. A large amount of data split between more tables, so overall has less effect on each table performance. Now, let's compare selecting a group of events based on their properties. To do this, we will use default WP query class and compare the speed of SQL queries it generates for both cases: getting events by meta fields and getting events by taxonomy terms. Here we can see that the taxonomies case is a clear winner. In absolute numbers, the difference seems small, but in relative terms, it almost twice as fast. And the last is getting the data on the single event page. Here we will use default WordPress functions to show the information about event category, format, and type on the single event page. As we can see, the speed is almost identical here, but meta fields have a slight advantage, which is also reflected in the number of database queries. This is due to the specific way WordPress operates. It gets all metadata for a specific post with a single database request. However, to fetch the information about the terms of a post, it makes additional queries for each taxonomy. So, as we can see, in terms of performance and database size, both methods of data storage have their own advantages. That's why you should make your decision after deep analyzing your project requirements. And let's highlight some key points to help you make that decision. If you need to work with post collection, especially filtering this collection by specific properties, it's better to store most of the additional data as taxonomy terms. All properties that logically suit taxonomies or are borderline between taxonomies and meta fields should be stored as taxonomies. If your main goal is to optimize a single post page, it makes sense to use meta fields, even if by logic this data seems closer to taxonomies. Let's summarize our research with a set of criteria that your data structure should meet and a checklist for modeling this data structure. So, criteria are next. First, minimize the size of stored data. Second, separate data for different entities into separate database tables each time when it's possible. And third, store data based on how you plan to use it later. And here is some kind of checklist on how to achieve this criteria. So, at first, based on your task, define which data needs to be stored. It should be minimum set of data to implement the task. Do not store anything just in case. Then decide where each piece of data belongs. If the data is not required on the front end, it's better to store it in custom tables. Next, the data that is required on the front end but does not use default WordPress logic such as single posts, archives, and so on should also be moved to custom database tables. The rest should be stored using default WordPress entities, posts, terms, or users. For data needed on the front end and stored as posts, you can use mixed optimization methods such as moving just metadata into separate table. Next, identify which data will be used to retrieve posts from the database or filter them. All data used to retrieve or filter posts that logically fit taxonomies should be stored as taxonomy terms. And any remaining data that could not be separated into custom database tables or taxonomies should be stored as metadata. By following these steps, we can be confident that we are building our website on a solid foundation where all data is organized as correctly as it's possible within the WordPress infrastructure. You can find this checklist by this link. It also will be added into the description of this video on YouTube. I hope it could help you with your next project. That's all for today. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.
Hello, WordPress Agency Summit. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm really thrilled to share at least a bit of my knowledge about Headless WordPress and is this really the future? My name is Maciek Palmowski. I work at Patchstack. Patchstack is a company that you probably might know because we are taking care of security. We are mostly concentrated about finding vulnerabilities inside plugins, themes, and sometimes even core. So if you never heard about Patchstack, you should give it a try. It's a very interesting product. Also, if you would ever like to contact me, you can send me an email to hi@maciekpomorski.dev. But okay, enough about me. Let's talk about headless. First things first, what even is this headless architecture? To start talking about headless, we first have to talk about what is the monolith. So imagine that there is a CMS, in our case WordPress, that has an admin panel in which we can add some data, edit it. So we can, for example, when it comes to WordPress, add posts, edit posts, remove pages, and so on. On the other hand, there is a mechanism that lets us show this data on the front end. In the case of WordPress, we are talking about themes, and everything is connected together. So this is one application that has, first of all, a way to edit data and to show it on the front end. This is a monolith. The most simple definition of headless is something like this. So we still have our admin panel in which we can edit our data, and there is a front end somewhere. It can be, let's say, XJS application or an Astro one, or even a Laravel application. It doesn't matter. The most important part is that it needs something to talk with this admin panel, in our case with WordPress. So for this, we need some sort of API. WordPress has a built-in REST API, but also there are plugins that would allow us to use GraphQL. But Rick here was a very wise person because headless, that just sounds like monolith with extra steps. And Rick is really right here. This is a horrible example of headless because it doesn't show any of its strength. It only looks like I said, like a monolith with extra steps. This is a much better example of headless. So imagine that we have our CMS, our WordPress, one WordPress to rule hundreds of websites, because we will have our home website. We'll also have like 100 of our landing pages and even a mobile application. And every time when we'll change something inside of our one WordPress, all the pages will have a proper data. So imagine that every time you will add something to the About Us page, it will change on all the pages. It's really convenient because we don't have to take care of hundreds of separate WordPresses and editing them one by one. It would be a horrible experience, right? With headless, we can do something like this, like one CMS to rule them all. On the other hand, imagine a different scenario. We have our website, but also we have many data sources. So we will have our WordPress for our blog. We will have some database in Notion where we keep, for example, our public appearances. And we'll also have our CRM from which we also are grabbing some kind of data. So all of those data sources are equal, and all the data has to land inside of one website. Also, you can imagine connecting this scenario with the one that I showed on the previous. This way, we will start creating some sort of a spider web of connections. But we also have to remember that CMSs doesn't have to be monolith or headless. They can be hybrid too. For example, WordPress, because WordPress at the same time can be a monolith CMS, and also it can be using its APIs to share the data with some other websites. But why? Why everyone is talking about headless so much? Because there was the moment when, like everything, that the headless is the future, we should all switch to headless, and so on and so on. Personally, I think that the reason is very obvious: money. And more of it's kind of a way to change the status quo. Because right now, our market is kind of set. Everyone knows its place. There are bigger companies, there are smaller companies, but in general, nothing changes too much. Thanks to Headless, a lot has changed because companies started to offer new types of products, new frameworks start to appear, and so on and so on. So it was kind of a way to break the status quo. We could also find a lot of articles about Headless, why it's so amazing, why we should go headless, why Headless is the future, and so on and so on. Is it? But I want to already tell you one thing. I do not fully agree with those. Why? Because most of those articles are trying to say that everything that is headless is amazing. That the moment when you switch to headless architecture, when you move from monolith WordPress to a headless one, your website will become faster, better, it will rank better in Google, and all other arguments. But the truth is, it's not entirely true. And now I am going to try to show you why it's not that obvious. Let's start with the performance, because this is one of the most popular arguments why we should switch to headless. The moment when you will start using this modern headless approach instead of this old legacy monolith one, your website will be faster, better, and so on. But the truth is, because this is partially true, but very often not because of headless itself, but because of some frameworks, for example, Astro or Next.js, can convert your website into a static one. You know, HTML, CSS, that's it. And the truth is that, yeah, HTML files are, in most cases, much faster than dynamic PHP ones. So this way, yes, our website might become faster, but it's not thanks to going headless, but becoming static. But the truth is, you don't need to change your architecture and rebuild your website to achieve static WordPress. There's a plugin for this. It's called Simply Static. It's that simple. On the other hand, I already showed you that Headless uses APIs, and APIs aren't magically more performant than directly querying the database. That's not true. So the only difference here is that sometimes when we are using the APIs, we are only asking for data that we really need instead of some more bloated plugins that will grab too much data, and that's why it will look like the monolith approach is slower. But in general, headless by itself shouldn't be any more performant than monolith. Another thing is security and maintenance. And let me remind you, I work at Patchstack, so I really know a bit about security. So first of all, one thing that makes headless WordPress a bit more secure is the fact that we are sometimes converting into static. And again, static websites are much more difficult to hack rather than dynamic ones because, well, HTML is just a static file, it's just an HTML. But on the other hand, even if we are converting our data to static one, there has to be a CMS somewhere. It gives us some opportunities to hide it a bit better, but still, it's somewhere. We still have to take care of it. We still have to update it. We still have to take care of its security. You know, all the strong passwords, making sure that we are granting access only to people who should have this access, and so on and so on. So not much changes. On the other hand, I already show you that when using, quite often we might have more than one environment, right? Because very often we'll be connecting many services. This way we have to take care of more environments rather than just one server. What's also important, because we will be using all those APIs, very often we will be using some keys to authenticate. And now we have to make sure that none of those keys becomes public. Believe me, sometimes it happens. So again, it's not that headless isn't secure or it's hard to maintain. I would just say it's as secure and it requires as much maintenance as most monolith CMSs. Another thing, and this is something that many developers will tell, That yeah, thanks to the moment we switched to headless, everything became much simpler. Well, I don't agree. Again, first of all, if you are used to WordPress, you know that you just install it, you can just push the code and everything works. You don't need any build steps or anything. I mean, sometimes you might have them, and that's okay, but you don't have them. You don't need to have them. With headless, very often, every time you will change content, you will have to rebuild your website. And that's okay. It's just part of the process. But let's not tell that it's simpler. Also, having a build step sometimes will require that you will build some kind of CI/CD pipeline. Some hosting providers will do it for you, but sometimes you may prefer to build it on your own in some applications like, I don't know, GitHub Actions or Buddy or something similar. Also, there are some plugins that won't work out of the box with REST or GraphQL API. Luckily, there are a lot of developers who are filling the gaps and are adding those integrations. But there will be some cases when there won't be any integration, there won't be any add-on plugin to our plugin, and we will either have to build this bridge on our own, or we will have to change our favorite plugin, which is something opposite of approach to developing websites, right? So right now, some of you might think, okay, so this guy is here and he is saying all those horrible things about headless. And yeah, that's true. Right now, I was a bit pessimistic about it. But also, I'm a huge fan of headless, really. And I think there are a lot of reasons to at least give it a try. But for some reasons, most of them aren't the ones that are the most popular. Personally, I think that the most important part about going headless is the freedom. Because right now, if we are using WordPress, we are kind of slaves of which technology WordPress choose. So in our case, PHP. And not everyone has to like PHP. I don't know why, because I think PHP is really cool, but still, there are people that think that PHP is horrible and they would prefer to build website in something different. And that's okay. Thanks to Headless, we can still have WordPress, and people who are managing the website will still use WordPress as usual, but the developers might build the front end in something totally different. They can use some fancy JavaScript framework like Astro, like Next. They can go with Laravel, or maybe they can even go, I don't know, using Rust or Go. It's up to them. And personally, this is the number one reason why people should choose headless. Another thing is the fact that headless has this approach of replacing parts with ease. Do you remember this the slide where I show you this website that has a blog on WordPress, database on Notion, and some CRM? And the cool part is that we can change the API which we are using, and instead of Notion, we can switch to, for example, Airtable. Both of them have an API, so we just have to change a bit of code here and there, and everything should be working. From WordPress perspective, it's a bit double-edged sword, because at some point we might realize, yeah, we are using WordPress for blogging, but we could use something else. And that's true, we could. But still, this part that we can replace everything that easily is also really cool, because together with the previous thing that I said, that we are no longer tied to a technology, it's really great because we can be much more flexible with our technology stack. Scalability. While I did say that when it comes to performance, headless isn't in any magical way faster than a monolith approach. That's true. But when we are trying to scale WordPress, we have kind of limited amount of things we can do. We can add faster CPUs, more RAM, things like that. With the headless approach, when sometimes we'll be running only some part of on WordPress, there will be this Notion part, there will be some separate CRM, we can scale every element separately. So this gives us much more opportunities to scale everything as we need, which is really cool. And also, let's not forget about the developer experience. Because while WordPress has one of the greatest user experiences, it's really familiar for so many people. I mean, I love training people when it comes to using WordPress website because there is a huge chance they already know some part of WordPress. So I'm just showing them a few details here, a few details there, and that's it. On the other hand, when it comes to developer experience, WordPress developer experience is much worse than, for example, Laravel's or Astro's or Next's. So developers will prefer to use other technologies rather than WordPress. Thanks to Headless, we can have a cookie and eat a cookie because our users will still be using WordPress and our developers will have brand new, shiny JavaScript framework or whatever they want. And that's really cool. So, right now, I already told you about some not so great things about Headless. I also showed you some amazing stuff about Headless. So, guessing that some of you might now start thinking, okay, maybe we should give this Headless approach a try, because why not? There are a few things you should keep in mind before even trying. First of all, and this is one of the most important things. Headless is just an architecture. That's it. Headless won't solve all of your problems. Headless isn't better or worse. It's just an architecture. In some cases, it will work better. In some cases, it will just add more problems. So if someone will tell you that, yeah, switch to Headless because it's better, no, it's not. It's different. And sometimes it is better, but it's only different and it's just an architecture. Remember, it's not a silver bullet. As you already might seen along the way, Headless will work better when we'll have the more complicated stack, the bigger team, or even more teams working on our products. Because using Headless for a simple website like a blog or something, I mean, you can do it and it's totally fine because it's always a good way to experiment in some way, but it won't show its true power. Headless is really great when we are talking about really big applications with many people where there are many things connected. For simple websites, not so much. And also, this is a very important thing because sometimes, as agency owners or developers, we think about CMSs in a bit different way, right? Because we just use the right CMS for the job. And very often we kind of don't care about people using it. And that's a huge mistake. And that's one of the things where Headless really shines. This is the thing that I kind of mentioned already, that thanks to Headless, we can preserve the user experience for people that are working with our CMS every day. Right? So if they are used to WordPress, let's not change anything for them. Let's just give them WordPress. So they can constantly use it and don't worry about that that some agency swoops in and say, yeah, look, there is a better CMS, you should change, you will be happy. No, that's not true. There will be many people in the team that won't be that happy about any change. So if they're used to WordPress, let's give them WordPress. On the other hand, thanks to Headless, our development team can use whatever they want. But still, people who are using it every day will keep the experience. So, is Headless the future? Classic response. It depends. It really depends on when you are planning to use it, how, what is your product, what is your team, what is your strategy for hiring people. A lot of questions. A lot of it depends. But the truth is that you might not need Headless at all. And that's totally fine. Never think that if you aren't jumping on this bandwagon, this Headless bandwagon, you are worse or you are missing something. No, not at all. Like I said, it's just an architecture, it's just a different way of creating software. It's not better, not worse. So if you feel that Headless is not for you, it's totally fine. On the other hand, there are already a lot of companies that are using it. I mean, TechCrunch, The Times, NASA, So yeah, they are all using Headless already, and that's okay. But this doesn't mean that you also have to. Don't worry. Okay, that's it. I hope that I help you a bit with explaining what Headless is and is it something you should give a try. If you have any questions, I'll be there on YouTube trying to answer all your questions. And if you have more questions, you can always reach me out on Twitter. And also you can submit to my newsletter. I share quite a lot of interesting things also about Headless. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. Have a great day, and I hope you'll enjoy all the other talks at this WordPress Agency Summit. So have a great day.
Tell me that you don't wanna fight. Tell me that you'll be there tonight. Tell me everything is alright. 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 Tell me that you don't wanna fight. Tell me that you'll be there tonight. Tell me everything is alright. Tell me everything is alright. Tell me. Tell me everything is alright.
How we doing, everyone? Hopefully you're doing great out there. Thank you so much for being here. And right off the bat, I also want to say thank you so much to Crockablock for inviting me to speak at the summit here. I'm greatly appreciative, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today. So the topic that I want to kind of go over and give you my insights and my analysis and everything on is how to build fast dynamic websites, specifically the stack that I'm currently using to do so. Now, and right off the bat as well, I want to tell you guys that this is pre-recorded, so I filmed this a couple weeks ago, and from when you're seeing it now, but it is obviously premiering live. I will be in the chat. So anything that you see, think about, any questions, thoughts, comments, if you just want to say hi, drop them in there. I will be there, and we can have a chat about my stack and the whole video here and any other questions that you have. So would be more than happy to do that. So make sure you do that. A little bit about me, just to kind of give you just to kind of paint a quick picture, is I've been building websites with WordPress specifically since 2017. I make YouTube videos now. I have a agency called FindIT that I have learned a ton through from all sorts of client projects, and then also my specific things that I've done for other projects, like on my own, like personal projects, things like that. So I've used a ton of different tools, right? And I try to document that on my website now, marksmansky.co and /tools. If you want to go there, you can see like everything that I use. But specifically in this video, I want to show you the stack that has gotten me to this point the best results when I'm trying to build fast dynamic websites. I think it's pretty good right now. Definitely not saying it's the best, and I'm also definitely saying that this is a lot of preference. You have to, don't just watch this video. If I could put a disclaimer here, don't just watch this video and copy my stack. I would much rather you watch this video and some other videos and then start to kind of learn through it. This is just to give you a little bit of an idea as to what might work for you, but I'm not saying it definitely will be perfect for your specific situation, the types of websites you're building, all that sort of stuff. That said, what I would classify this stack as is very performant, meaning there's not a lot of bloat, the code is pretty clean, and everything kind of just like works together, so to speak. Well, there's not a lot of, there's literally not a lot of plugins, you will see. There's not a lot of stuff going on. It's tight, okay? I think that's important. That's an important thing to consider. It's very capable, so there's not a lot of limitations, so to speak, meaning that all the times I've had stacks in the past, I've had, amalgamations of tools in the past, and I've ran up against hurdles, whether they were performance-based or specifically functionality-based. I literally could not do something for some reason, right? And that was a little annoying, and then I had to go find another plugin and put that in my stack or maybe custom code it or what have you, but not ideal. If you can find yourself a tight stack that is very capable, I think that's huge. And then the last thing is efficiency, maintainability. Tough to kind of describe this, but the idea is if you are going to build more than one site, then you should really consider what that actually means and what the ramifications of having a really good stack could potentially be, like very positively. So if you have this and it's reusable, so to speak, and it's, you can constantly be making a lot of websites quickly, depending on your goals, you just want it to be very stable in that regard, and you want it to be fast. If in the case where you need to come back to something later, everything's as standardized as possible. If you're trying to build an agency or just, multiple websites in general, standardization is good. So I would say that. And then the other thing that I would say is that if you are building more than one website, which is what you'll kind of see here, if you're in an agency mode or even the freelancer mode, you should try to stick most of the time to a stack. You want to have something that's familiar. You want to have something that is, maybe that you could put together a blueprint site for, and then you can just kind of like clone it and be ready to go. We'll talk more about that, but we'll get into it. So as I go through all this and stuff like this, as I finish up this preamble that we got here, I want to go through this with the mentality of somebody that the best way I think to organize this is kind of from the ground up. So we're not going to talk just specifically about the website. We're going to give a little bit about like domain registrars, DNS, hosting, those types of things, because those are all part of your stack, even though they're not like specifically on the WordPress install. We'll get into that as well, because I do think that is something that, if you're a beginner or if you're trying to still continue to refine your stack, I know that over my period of time, not have I just changed the tools, I've also added individual like categories of tools, so to speak. DNS management, like kind of being one of them. Again, we'll get into all that. So it's just kind of an important disclaimer that I wanted to kind of put in here, as we go. Last couple things here is as we go through this, I am going to talk about my stack, but I'm going to talk about maybe a couple little anecdotes or stories or tips, because to make a really good dynamic fast website, we're not going to be able to cover it in 25 minutes, but to do that, you have to not just have the tools, but you have to know how to use them, and you have to know a little bit of intangible stuff that hopefully I can kind of interject here and there in this talk. So hopefully that'll help. All right. So with all that said, let's jump over into our kind of blueprint site, and I will just start showing you a bunch of things, and we'll kind of just walk through all of this together. Now, what you are seeing here is where I want to start, but it's not what we're going to talk about first. This is a blueprint website. Now, if you're not familiar with what that is, super simple definition is you go and you install an instance of WordPress, a clean WordPress installation on your hosting and everything like that. We'll talk about that. And maybe you could actually follow along here kind of if you want to do something like this, if you don't already have a blueprint site. A blueprint site is the site that you pretty much clone, per se, depending on the terminology that you're using, every single time that you start a new website. if you are going to build more than one website in your life, I kind of think that you should probably have a blueprint website. If you're going to be building them at scale, you absolutely need to. It's definitely going to help you, and you're not going to be like it's going to take out so much work if you can just get your website, your blueprint website to where you need to be. We can make a whole different video on kind of like the setup and everything like that, but at a high level, just get all your plugins, your themes, any sort of like maybe code snippets or things that you use, license keys, any settings to native core WordPress. You want to make sure that's all good. You also want to make sure that these things are auto-updating, because this is a site that you're not actually going to be using. It's a site that's going to be probably sitting on your server or maybe sitting on a local environment. You want to make sure that all that is kind of like kept up to date. Not so much of a big deal if it's on a local environment, but still, this is the site that you're like, okay, this is kind of your template, so to speak, for your whole install. And like, okay, we got a new client. We're going to clone our blueprint website and we're going to go to work. So that is the concept there. We'll come back to this, but I want to give you this thought because this is what your goal, so to speak, is. This is kind of like the end of, if I said somebody, what's my stack? I could show them this blueprint website and I could explain that kind of through there. So with all that said, let's start at the beginning, like I said earlier. Where we kind of need to start for something like this, in my opinion, is way at like the top or the bottom, depending on how you look at this a stack. And I'll say the bottom. We have to start at the bottom. What is the first thing that if somebody said, hey, I want to build a website, what's the first thing that you're going to have to think about or do or whatever? In my opinion, this is probably a little subjective, but in my opinion, it's a domain name. So I'm approaching this talk from more of like an agency perspective, but if you're just building your own website, you kind of have to think about it to a certain degree. So I'll kind of cover a little bit of both things. In the agency world, you need to have domain names. And most of the time, you're going to have a client, at least in my experience, where they either have a domain name already, we're transferring it, we're buying it for them. Golden little tip number one is our agency does not own domain names for other people. So you have to think about a good way to manage that domain. You want access to it, but you don't want to own it. What we have pretty much landed on is Namecheap as the domain registrar that we use. Our clients have an account at Namecheap. We have an account at Namecheap. Our clients buy the domain name. They make sure it's renewed and everything like that. And then we have access to it. We have like shared domain access to it. It works really well. There's other platforms that you'd use for it. But Namecheap, in my opinion, is like a really good average consumer way of handling the domain names. So that is what we do for client domains. Now, for all the domains that I personally have, the agency has, and everything like that, we kind of prefer Cloudflare. And the reason is because we use DNS at Cloudflare. We'll talk about that secondly here in a second. But Cloudflare has a domain registrar. Domains are actually like even cheaper than a lot of other places, which is not a huge deal because it's not super expensive to begin with. But Cloudflare is just a mammoth of a company. They have a lot of like very generous free stuff that you could do. And then you could add on if you need to for other plans and pricing and everything like that. But just to cover the domain registration portion of this video, our agency, like client domains, we have them transfer, or we have them buy at Namecheap, and then we get the shared access to that, and they manage all that. And then for Cloudflare, that's where we put our domain names. We register them at Cloudflare. So if we go to the second thing that I would say is DNS, because okay, you have a domain name now, and now it's like, well, what do you do next? Like, is there a piece in there? And this is what I was talking about earlier. This is one of those things that I didn't have for a while. We didn't have in the agency. And adding Cloudflare really adds a ton of things. Like, I mean, again, if you look through the product offering, even just on the free plan, you kind of get like CDN, you get like SSL stuff. Like, there's a lot kind of going on here. It's a little bit of a more managed approach depending on what you're used to, perhaps. But honestly, if you're serious about this, you want to make a lot of websites, you want to have like a real big impact on your clients' like website and technical architecture like that, Cloudflare is literally the GOAT as far as it comes to like DNS management and everything like that. So that is what we decided to use there. And again, most of our stuff is just, I think, on the free plan for the Cloudflare side of things. But instead of connecting the domain directly to our hosting, we have Cloudflare kind of as that proxy in the middle. Gives us some added benefits, low cost. It's really fantastic. So, and the next thing too is we have domain registrar, we have DNS. The next thing would be hosting. And this is where it gets kind of like a ton of options. Not only a ton of options, but a lot of like interesting things that, do you want managed hosting? Do you want like, self-managed? There's a whole thing there. We don't have time to go into everything. I'm just trying to give you where I've landed so far. What we currently use is GridPane for what I would say is our mediator, kind of like the control panel, so to speak, above the actual like box or the actual server. For the servers, we use Vultr. The cool thing about GridPane and Vultr, in my opinion, and GridPane also integrates with other platforms like DigitalOcean and such, AWS, and on and so forth. But the cool part about GridPane is that when you go to GridPane, you get all the technical stack and you get the everything that's in that kind of like, you will call it GUI layer, so you can integrate, so you can interface with the cloud servers here at like Vultr, for instance. But the awesome part is that we pay Vultr for the boxes, so we control the boxes through Vultr, and GridPane kind of sits atop it. There are other companies which are good as well, but there are other companies that you don't do that through, and it's more of like you go to the company, you buy the server, and then they own the server and they control that server, and you don't really have that direct access if you need it. I'm not saying necessarily you would need it, but it's nice to have the access if and when it's needed, because I've already had situations like that where that has really saved us. So yeah, so GridPane is kind of the technical stack that sits atop that, and we use Vultr for the actual boxes for our personal stuff and for the client stuff, and it's all worked really well. Just can't say enough about it. Really like the stack from the, we'll call it like everything. What we've covered so far is everything above the actual like WordPress install, right? So let's kind of dive into that. Okay, so now we are at this point where, okay, great. So if we're walking through this journey, we have a domain name, we have DNS, we have our hosting, our box, and everything like that. Our technical stack is really solid there. What about, you're saying, Mark, we got to build something. What are we doing here? Well, a lot of different options out there, as we know, for actually building, like page building or actually constructing like sites and stuff like that in the WordPress ecosystem. We are currently using Bricks. So if you haven't used Bricks, a lot of people have. It's very popular right now. If you haven't used Bricks, though, the best way I can kind of describe it is, just again, specifically for me, is it made me feel, when I switched to Bricks, it made me feel more like an actual true like web developer, so to speak, because everything, it's taken a very, I don't know a good way to describe it, but like a very like almost HTML based approach. When you add an H1, it puts the H1, it opens the H1 tag, puts the whatever the heading is, and then closes the H1 tag. Like that's what it looks like in the actual code when you look at it. I feel like it takes you back to a much more like basic yet powerful way of interfacing with building a website. The elements, they have like pre-made elements that you can do different things with if you want, but if you really want like a true like GUI, like a graphical user interface for like building an HTML website, so to speak, that's kind of the way that I thought about it. I mean, I'm underselling it, so to speak, because there's a lot more to it. But that's just the way that I kind of think about it. And that's the feeling that it gave me. And once you understand that, especially if you came from that at all in a background before, then it's probably for you. I will counter that though, honestly, and I will say that there may be a lot of designers out there that it's not exactly like perfect for, because maybe it's just a different way of working. Not saying it's the end all be all, I'm just saying it's what I use and we use at the agency, and I'm liking it so far. So that's what I would say about Bricks there. And also one other thing too, not to mention, is that Bricks is one of the builders that Crocoblock integrates with. So it's fantastic in that regard. We'll get to that in a second here. Next thing that we have is Happy Files. So WordPress currently in September of 2024 does not really have like a native media management system. It obviously has a media library, but doesn't have anything in there to handle that. So what Happy Files does is it gives you like a folder structure basically within your WordPress media library, and you can just create folders and you can just categorize your stuff like way better than you could have without it. So if you come over to the media library, you can kind of see here that you just have like, just give you a little live demo here, branding placeholders. Like you can do whatever you want. You have subfolders. There's other features as well, especially because Bricks and Happy Files are created by the same team. There's some integrations there. But even without Bricks, Happy Files is definitely something cool to add because you would not have this functionality elsewhere. And then you could also, again, I'm not trying to get into a tutorial on every single one of these, but you could also get into other post types and things like that and organize them the same way as you can the media. Definitely just something, again, for productivity and organization within the backend admin of WordPress. The next one here that we have is ShortPixel. Now, I don't use ShortPixel on every single website, but I put this in here because it's a very specific thing that relates directly to what we're talking about here. If you want to have a fast website, you absolutely need to manage the files the file sizes of the things that you're putting on there. I've had so many times, guilty of it in the past, where like we're putting, like you're getting client images or you're taking images and you're putting on the website. I mean, they're like multiple megabytes that you're never going to have a fast site like that just because you're trying to load too much stuff. You got to make sure that your images are properly sized. You got to make sure that they're properly compressed. And then you could, leverage something like Short Pixel. They have a nice, thing on their website here where you can compress things, one-offs or even bulk things. But they have like an integration, a plugin, obviously, with WordPress. But the point is, if you're serving properly sized images that are compressed, and particularly like WebPs or next-gen formats that are not like huge like PNGs or anything like that, you're going to be pretty good, okay? A lot more to that. I'm scratching the surface there. But you need something like this. Again, there's other ones as well. We use Short Pixel from time to time. A lot of times, though, we're compressing them outside the website and then just uploading them, and it works fine. But you need something. So I wanted to put this in here because it's an extremely important point that often is overlooked, and it could be damning to your website because now your website is huge, and that's never going to load fast. Next one is, there we go, Crockablock. I've used Crockablock for several years now, and I discovered it when I was actually back in the Elementor, as Elementor as my main page builder. And as I said before, it integrates with Bricks now too, so that's awesome. And Crockablock has been my go-to because, and I really appreciate everything the team has done because there's a litany of products. And obviously, if you're watching this here on the Crockablock stream, I don't have to necessarily tell you about all this, but there is just a ton of different things here that you can utilize. And I've used pretty much every single one of these on different projects in the past. Some of them now, given the Bricks workflow, some of them like aren't necessary, but they're all incredibly powerful. The main one, because some of these obviously you don't need necessarily on every single website depending on what you're building, right? The main one though is Jet Engine, right? And a lot of times Jet Engine even gets confused with Crockablock, which is understandable. But Jet Engine is what I use on. It's on the Blueprint site. You can see it right over here, right? So I love Jet Engine because it it integrates with all those other tools very easily. So if I need to use it, then I can. But specifically with Jet Engine I actually like how they've done a lot of different things. Obviously, they have components now and everything like that. But I love what Jet Engine does specifically with post types and everything. But specifically with relations, I really like the way that the relations have done. And and again, I can show you some live demos and things like that on my website here, markszymanski.co. There's a couple of different places where I've started to relate different things to, if you're relating like one post type to another, there's a lot of added benefit there. And you can do that with other post type tools for sure. But the way that Jet Engine does it, I think it's probably one of the most intuitive that I've seen specifically for like bi-directional relationships and stuff like that. So just really appreciate the work that Crockablock is doing and use them on every single site. So it's a core piece of our stack currently. The next one is automatic CSS. And if you're building with Bricks or other platforms as well, but if you're trying to this is where the more maintainable side of things comes in. If you're trying to build at scale, reuse things and be efficient, you need to have some sort of way to organize the stuff that you're using. If you're coming from a different page building experience, this might be a newer concept, and it was for me, it still is for me. But if you're adding CSS classes in Bricks, and you're adding different, you need some sort of a framework, I feel. I mean, again, automatic CSS has helped me. There's other options as well, but it's helped me so much. And then the fact that it integrates directly as like a sister product with the frames where I can now bring in components and layouts and different things like that to just drop them in. It's very good for like quick prototyping of a website, or like if you're doing if you want to speed up a client build and you just want to pop different things in there and then kind of go from there. It's just, I don't know. Again, I've built this stack specifically and curated these tools in this way. And it's just really increased my efficiency and my capability of what I can do. And it's also, I'm going to throw this in here because I don't think I've said this yet. It's also taught me a hell of a lot. When you try different tools and you try different workflows and you expand like your go out of your comfort zone a little bit, you might be surprised what you find. I've definitely been surprised with what I've been able to do, what I've learned, and all that sort of stuff. So definitely something to consider if you are, watching this and looking for other stack items and software to use, because there's a lot of different really good tools out there. Next one we use is WS Form. Now, WS Form is, I would say, in my opinion, probably one of the best, if not the best, form building plugins. I've not used every single one, but the way in which that I have been able to, this is just one of those ones where it's pretty much like everything that I could possibly think of. I've never been, there isn't really a feature that I could like think of that I haven't been able to accomplish with things in WS Form. There's just a lot of like really cool like dynamic functionality as far as like conditional logic and dynamic submissions, and then like a ton of different add-ons for different SaaS platforms as well. And I'm just, I've started using WS Form, I want to say a year or so ago, and I'm just really happy with everything that it could do. So it's definitely made my life a lot better as far as the really, again, my biggest thing, if you know me, is dynamic data. I'm absolutely crazy about like trying to make things as dynamic as possible so I can manage less things, so to speak, like less static things. And this has just really helped. I mean, you can import posts directly, like you could go through a form and put posts into the back end. I mean, there's just, I literally cannot get to all the stuff in just 25 minutes for all these tools, but that's currently what we're using there. Next one is Termageddon. So Termageddon is something that, again, I was kind of trying to go through this cycle of tools sort of like as I would in a project environment. So Termageddon comes more towards the end for us, where you are going to need something like this for your clients or for yourself if you don't want to like hire a lawyer and have like legal policies, but you do need like terms of use or terms of service, privacy policy, disclaimers, things like that. Termageddon is fantastic for that. You answer questions, it creates the policies, it always updates you on the policies. Hans and Donata and the whole team over there, they are like hawks for the new privacy laws that are coming out. We love it. So it's awesome. It makes our life easier, makes our clients happy, and I would highly recommend that just as a vital piece of our stack, and it's awesome. So rank math, again, slightly outside the scope of like the dynamic and fastness of a stack here, but rank math is another important one that we have to have for SEO. We just have the free version normally because it gets the job done for us, but it is great because there's a ton of different things you can do, specifically like it's like built-in redirections and all that sort of stuff, and obviously takes care of all the main SEO things. But you got to have that because it doesn't matter if your site is fast or not. You got to make sure that it's ranking or that people can find it. So that's an important piece there. Now this last one is probably the most critical for what we're talking about here today: dynamic fast sites. Now the thing is, what I have, if we take and we stop right here and we look back at the whole way that we got here, honestly, if you are building responsibly, if you're making sure you're using like small like WebP like images, if you're not doing crazy like video embeds, right? Like again, I do a lot of video. if you're careful with the video embedding and things like that, and all of those like more technical performance based tasks when you're building, you actually might not need with the stack. I'm just telling you from personal experience. There's actually times where I don't need a performance plugin like Perf Matters. Okay. However, if you do have a situation like that, if you do have, like videos that are kind of bogging it down, like YouTube embeds or stuff like that, or you just do have like a website that it has a lot of mass to it, right? Like a lot of images or just heavy on video or something like that. Perf Matters is definitely something that has helped us tremendously. We've used Perf Matters on several sites at this point, and every single time it's just like, it is kind of like there's a ton of settings, but it's more or less like you enable it, and then there's a lot of like defaults, and you can kind of go through and check some things off. But just a lot of different things on the back end. Again, I can't get to all of it right now, but it is the one that has helped us the most with just given again the stack that we have here when we need it. So I would say this is kind of like the next the secret weapon, so to speak. If you get to this point and you're like, my speed, I built really well, I followed all like pretty good best practices, but it's not really where I want it. maybe I need perf matters to take us over the edge and get us to the finish line there, that's probably what I would recommend. But with all that being said, guys, I hope that you learned a little bit of something here, at least got some insights onto the different tooling and the way that we build websites. If you're interested in any of this stuff, if you head over to markszymanski.co/tools, you can see everything that we've mentioned here and way more. This is all the tools that I've personally used in my agency and personal career here. A lot of information here, a lot of stuff if you want to check it out. And the other thing too that I'll mention while we're here is that if you want to play around with this website, this is kind of going to give you an idea of what that stack can do, at least from us building it, so to speak, because this was built with that same stack that we just talked about a month ago. So it'll give you kind of a little bit of an idea as far as a real world example of what we just talked about. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, or you just want to reach out, if you head over to mjs.bio, you can see all my links over there and check it all out. To Crockablock, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys later.
Hi, and welcome to Accessibility, Faster Sites and Processes. Today we're going to cover little information about me, what accessibility is, terminology and laws about accessibility, that your visitors do in fact have disabilities, how accessible sites are in fact faster websites, how to streamline accessibility for faster processes, how to measure your accessibility, how to test for accessibility, and then what to do next. Slides and links for this presentation and others are available at easya11yguide.com/learn. I'm Jen Harries from the Easy Alley Guide. I'm a DHS trusted tester, and I've been in accessibility for more than 5 years. The Easy Alley Guide helps agencies who know that web accessibility is important, but don't know how to actually get started implementing accessibility into their processes and producing accessible websites for their clients. We have an accessibility agency program to help agencies incorporate accessibility into all of their processes and really produce great results for their clients. We have both done with you and done for you services to help you at different stages of your accessibility journey. We want to help you move accessibility from a headache to a recurring revenue item. So what is accessibility? Accessibility is about allowing all people, regardless of their abilities, to use your website and to interact with you on social media and via email. Plenty of technology already exists to help people use the web, email, and social media. What we need to do as web developers is not put up barriers. Web accessibility is about your entire online presence. So wherever you have your content and you can control your content, you need to be considering web accessibility. So that means not just your website, but also your social media, including both your posts, your private messages, and your profiles, your emails, including your transactional, marketing, and direct email. Some definitions and terminology around web accessibility. WCAG is something you will hear constantly. That's WCAG, and that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are maintained by W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. These are the same folks who make HTML and CSS. The current versions that are discussed in most laws are version 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2. Within these guidelines, they have different levels. Level A has the fewest requirements. Level AA incorporates everything in Level A and adds some more requirements. And finally, Level AAA has the most requirements, incorporating everything from A and AA. Generally speaking, AA is used in all of the laws. The current version of WCAG is 2.2 Level AA, but you will also hear 2.0 and 2.1 throughout this presentation as they apply to different laws. Compliance versus conformance is an important concept when it comes to accessibility, especially since accessibility affects the legal space. Compliance is about a specific law. An entire organization complies with an entire law. So this incorporates not just someone's web presence, but also their physical location, their processes, their hiring. It's a very all-encompassing term. Conformance is about guideline. A website conforms to a specific standard or a specific version of WCAG. So when you're talking to your clients and your customers, you need to make it clear the difference. You can talk about conformance of a website to WCAG in a specific version. You cannot talk to them about compliance. Speaking of legal matters, when it comes to lawyers and web accessibility laws, you need to be careful. Most lawyers don't know about web accessibility. It is a very new area of law, and when they went to law school, many of these laws did not exist. Some more terminology for web accessibility. A11Y is an abbreviation for accessibility. It removes 11 letters between A and Y, and it's commonly pronounced ally or ally. An overlay widget is a technology that exists between a website and an end user. It sits in the middle and it manipulates and modifies the website before it gets to the end user. In general, overlay widgets are not something you want to be using. The European Disability Forum released a statement in 2023 specifically saying overlays do not make the website accessible or compliant with European accessibility legislation. They do not constitute an acceptable alternative or substitute for fixing the website itself. So if you are dealing with Europe, you do not want to be using an overlay. Now let's get into the big law that's coming out in Europe in June of 2025. This is the European Accessibility Act. It is a directive and it affects private companies. This is a minimum requirement. Each member nation can implement a higher requirement than the minimum in the EAA. Several countries in their implementation of the EAA have included fines and jail time. A number of the penalties start at around 60,000 euros. The EAA applies to your business if you sell to Europe. That means it applies to you even if your business is outside of Europe. You are exempted if you are what's called a micro enterprise. That means you must meet both of the following criteria. You have less than 2 million euros in global annual revenue and less than 10 employees. What to do if you are selling products or services to the European market? You want to make sure that your website is conformant to WCAG 2.2 level AA. You also need to make sure that products and services such as plugins, themes, or SaaS products themselves are accessible. You are also required to include information regarding the product or service's accessibility alongside the rest of the product information. So if you have a page about a theme that you are selling, you have to include the accessibility information about the theme right along with the rest of the sales content. You also have to ensure that your documentation to support the theme, such as a wiki, a help desk, a knowledge base, etc., is also accessible. And finally, you have to make sure that your website includes an accessibility statement. Now we're going to talk about different types of disabilities that people have. First one is temporary. Pretty much everyone is going to experience a temporary disability at some point in their life. Some people will experience that daily, some weekly, some monthly. Examples of temporary disabilities involve headaches, medication side effects, substances such as alcohol or recreational drugs, injuries, and medical procedures. Even something like a headache can impair someone's ability to concentrate and focus and mimic many of the same challenges that people with conditions like ADHD face. Situational disabilities are a disability that someone encounters because of a situation they are in. Someone who is pushing a stroller is going to have a lot of issues with a staircase, as strollers and staircases don't mix. If someone is sitting in a loud cafe, they're not going to be able to listen to the audio on a video. If someone is outside walking their dog, it's bright and sunny and it's very washed out screen on their mobile phone. It's very difficult to read text, especially if that text has low contrast. Finally, if someone's in a moving vehicle, they may already be a little bit motion sick. If your website has a lot of scrolling, parallax, movement going on, that can significantly exacerbate the motion sickness and have people rapidly leaving your website. Finally, there are permanent disabilities. These are disabilities that people will live with for the rest of their lives. And there's two categories within permanent disabilities. There's those that are counted under most laws, and there are those that are not. The counted disabilities are frequently called a qualified disability in a law. And this means issues like being legally blind, being deaf, having a permanent limb issue. Whereas there are other permanent disabilities, such as carpal tunnel syndrome, being nearsighted or farsighted, being colorblind and unable to tell the difference between red and green, mild issues with ADHD, and other neurodiversity. These things affect people on a daily basis, but they don't get counted in the official numbers. In the United States, about 27% of the adult population has a counted disability, and about 40% of those people over 65. Your website visitors have disabilities. Exactly how many? Well, it's probably north of 20%, and in many cases can be much higher. The global disability market has north of $1.9 trillion in annual disposable income. That is a lot of money. The focus of the summit is on speed. So let's talk about accessibility and how it can help make your websites faster. Accessibility is about removing the barriers that prevent people from being able to use your website. By default, a plain HTML website is already accessible. The tools already exist. People don't need extra help. What they need us to do is make good choices that don't create any barriers for them. So how does this happen? What kinds of things make websites inaccessible? The first is lack of knowledge and lack of testing. If you don't know anything about web accessibility, you're probably causing problems for people. If you aren't regularly testing for it, you're also probably having problems. Lack of semantic markup and using accessible component libraries. The good news is there are several accessible component libraries out there that already exist. They are free, they're available for you to use, they're well documented. All you have to do is know where to find them. And the links are, of course, available. One of the keys of an accessible website is using semantic markup. This means that divs are not buttons. Don't just use generic HTML elements for everything. It is important to use the correct HTML elements for the right pieces of data. This allows the browser to do most of the work for you, which means you don't have to add a whole bunch of CSS and JavaScript to handle all these different conditions. Another way that websites become inaccessible is by adding lots of CSS and JavaScript to modify the content. And of course, design and content decisions that are made by people who just don't know about web accessibility. An important thing about web accessibility to remember is that Google and other search engines are screen readers. By optimizing your website for people with disabilities and people using assistive technology, you are also optimizing for search engines and SEO friendliness of your website. Well-written code is secure, accessible, and performant. Poorly written code requires a lot of remediation and additional code to correct. A plugin that created menus, specifically mega menus, was having a lot of difficulty trying to make their code work for accessible technology. The primary issue was their code was not semantic. They were not using properly ordered lists, and they didn't want to modify their HTML. Because of this, they ended up spending over 2 months trying to come up with a JavaScript solution that used a lot of extra code. Here's an example of a website that had accessibility improvements by getting rid of a theme forest theme and using a much more accessible and lightweight theme. The code was significantly simplified, even though the front end remained very, very similar. Before the updates, JavaScript execution time was 1.7 seconds. After, it was 0.9 seconds. Before, it had main thread work of 3.6 seconds. After, main thread work was 1.8 seconds, half of what it was previously. The DOM size was significantly reduced, from about 1,300 elements down to only 270. Simpler, faster websites. This is what we all want. Accessible websites frequently also have fewer visual elements. By reducing the amount of content that has to be loaded, we make these websites faster and decrease the file sizes and improve page load speeds. This also makes the website easier to use for people who have visual impairments and makes it easier for people who have poor internet connections. Another aspect of accessible websites is improved browser compatibility. By using semantic markup, you are using markup that is well supported by the browser. That means it does the work for you, and you don't have to write a whole bunch of extra JavaScript to perform these basic functions. This saves a lot of time in testing. Generally speaking, when you're testing a much more accessible website, cross-browser testing, including reporting and correcting, runs an average of about 2 minutes per page. I encounter about 1 cross-browser issue per 10 pages. Accessibility can also help you optimize your content, making it much easier for people to read. When there's less text and less complex text, it's easier for all users to read. Most people are skimming. They are only giving your website part of their attention, which means it needs to be simple. This also helps people whether they have a headache or ADHD. It just makes the website easier for people to consume. For example, on one website that we did some accessibility work on, after the improvements, customer service calls were reduced by 30%. Streamlining accessibility and incorporating it into the processes within your agencies. You want to incorporate accessibility early and often. You want to consider it at each step in your processes and make sure to test for it. We found that issues that aren't discovered until the end of development can cost 100 times more than if the same issue was found in design. It's really important to work on your checklists and your testing to make sure that things aren't missed. You need to know the settings and processes that you need to use for each of your tools. Many plugins can produce an accessible website, but only if you use the right settings. There are a lot of wrong settings that can create an inaccessible website. So it's very important that you document the right settings to use and incorporate these into your processes. This speeds up your operations and improves the consistency of the results that you produce. It's also important to check the terms of service for the tools that you are using to see if they mention accessibility. Here's an example of a tool's terms of service that are not good. You acknowledge and agree that the company does not warranty, assure, and/or guarantee that the software is or shall ever be compliant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, this is concerning for a few different reasons. Number one, they're talking about compliance with regard to guidelines. That is wrong language, which means whoever wrote this doesn't really understand accessibility and the correct language to be using. They should say conformant with the accessibility guidelines. This also tells us that this company is not going to prioritize accessibility. It's important to contact your vendors now before the European Accessibility Act goes into effect in June 2025. Here's an example email that you can send. I have a client who falls under the European Accessibility Act and requires a website that is WCAG 2.2 Level AA conformant. What information do you have on the accessibility conformance of whatever product you're asking about? Testing and measuring the accessibility of websites. There are 2 ways to test for accessibility. The first is automated, and that's testing that is performed by machines. And the second is manual, and that is testing performed by humans. Some popular examples of automated testing tools are WebAIM's Wave tool, DQ's Axe tool, and Google's Lighthouse tool. The Google Lighthouse tool is actually powered by DQ's Axe. Automated testing can find about half of the issues on a website. DQ had done a detailed study of 13,000 pages that they tested via both automation and manual testing. This was, of course, done with the DQ Axe tool. They found that about 80% of the WCAG issues came from about 15% of the WCAG criteria. Many agencies want to leverage automated testing, but the question is, how good is automated testing? They found that automation could find roughly half of the total issues on a website. From this study, they found that automation was quite good at finding issues with color contrast for text, parsing, and finding missing alt text. Unfortunately, automation was quite poor at form testing, button testing, keyboard testing, determining if labels and instructions are actually useful, determining if the order of content is correct, and non-text contrast, which meant that a lot of things were not found by automation that affect real people. Since a small number of WCAG criteria account for the vast majority of problems on a website, we can actually get pretty good coverage on testing by using a selected list of manual testing combined with our automated testing. Doing this, we can usually achieve about 90% of issue coverage and tackle most of the real problems that people face. This is called the quick audit testing process. During it, we test for images, form markup, links, and link state. We have 3 separate tests just for keyboard testing. We test on zoom, text, and resize, color contrast, autoplay and animations, captions and transcripts for video and audio, and we do screen reader testing. By following these manual steps, we're able to test for 90% or more of the actual issues on real web pages and the actual challenges that real people encounter when they try to use a website. Let's recap what we covered and what you can do next. We covered that accessibility for websites is about removing barriers. It applies to your whole online presence, which includes social media and email, not just your websites. Accessibility is about meeting user expectations, making sure that they have predictable experiences based on all of the websites that they've previously visited in their lives. We talked about accessibility terminology and the different laws that apply, such as the upcoming EAA that goes into effect in Europe in June of 2025. We talked about different types of disabilities that people have, and we talked about how websites become inaccessible. We covered that search engines care about the accessibility of your website, as search engines process your website in a very similar way to a screen reader. We talked about how accessible websites are faster and easier for people to use. We talked about adding accessibility to your processes, that you need to check with your vendors and find out what their accessibility policies are and what they have already done to improve their products to make them more accessible to people. And we talked about how you can test for accessibility, including both automated testing and how much it can cover and what it's good at, and what you need to do via manual testing. The slides for this presentation and the links from within this presentation are available at easya11yguide.com/learn. You can also learn more on the Easy Alley Guide YouTube channel. It has tutorials and a whole bunch of videos on common accessibility questions, including how on earth do I sell accessibility to my clients? The Easy Alley Guide website has tutorials, guides, tools, and services, and more for web agencies. And another learning experience for accessibility is WordPress Accessibility Day that is coming up October 9th and 10th. It's going to be 24 hours of accessibility talks.
Hey, welcome to the session, Object Cache for faster dynamic data. So in this session, we're going to talk a lot about the WordPress Object Cache, how you can use it, leverage it, make sure that your sites that have a lot of dynamic data, a lot of custom post types, custom fields, taxonomies, team pages, membership sites, recipe sites, e-commerce, all of these sites that end up using a lot of data. We're going to see how we can make sure that they're as fast and performant as possible, something that's great for you, great for your users, great for your bottom line. So let's jump into it with a little background about myself. My name is Brian. I'm the technology director at HTC. We're a WordPress agency and a WordPress VIP partner. I've been working in WordPress for the last 10 years as a developer. I've gotten to work with a lot of big clients in the education and nonprofit space. So places like Harvard, UCLA, Hyatt. I've worked in the industry of WordPress as well with places like WordPress.com. I've spoken at WordCamps. I do content on YouTube, and I also write for a lot of the industry publications like WP Tavern and WP Minute. So there's a link to my website where you can kind of see where all of that stuff is. But suffice to say, my background is really focused on WordPress development, and especially on WordPress sites that go beyond the basic blog or marketing site, sites that have a lot of dynamic data, a lot of custom post types, a lot of fields and metadata and that sort of stuff, and working on how to make those performant when you get to a really large scale. So let's start with a big question. What is dynamic data, at least in the context of this conversation? You're going to hear from a lot of great speakers today about dynamic data, and everyone's going to have sort of a different approach to it. It might mean different things in different places, but I think overall there's some general stuff that we can all agree on what dynamic data is. And for this particular presentation, what we're talking about is, number one, anything that has to be queried or looked up. So dynamic data is not really just like the basic content in a page on WordPress. It's when you start getting a little bit more advanced. You use custom post types, you use custom fields, you use taxonomies. You're starting to connect different things together. You want to be able to make relationships between different objects. And if I look at this, blog post, and then I pull in some related posts beneath it that I think have the same category, that's going to be dynamic. It's going to be different on every page. All of that stuff, has to be looked up from the database. There's a lot of cost to it to do the logic, to do that thinking, to pull it all into memory, all of that sort of stuff. So that's where dynamic data comes in. And another way to talk about that is content that might look different at different times or to different users. So maybe one person loads a page and they see a certain, set of recommended blog posts. To continue that example, somebody else might see something else. On different articles, you might see different things. Logged in users might see different content than logged out users. So anything that's really not static, anything that's just really dynamic, changes for the context that it's in, that's another example of dynamic data. And I think a third way to say it is really any content that gets onto the WordPress page in some way that just feels complicated or complex. Anything other than I went into the, WordPress editor and I put some content in. Anything beyond that, that's probably dynamic data. There's probably some database queries that have to run to kind of pick the right stuff and put it in there. So that's what we're really focused on today, is that process. And, a tool that we're going to talk about that's built into WordPress, that if you just kind of pay attention to different settings, do a couple experiments, you can make sure that it's actually keeping that dynamic data super fast, super performant. So to take this out of the realm of explanation and into a real practical example, we're going to look at just a recipe blog. I think it's a great example of dynamic data and something that might seem a little simple at first, just, a blog, and actually be a lot more complicated. So right here, this is Bon Appetit. I'm going to click on it. We're going to look at their real website right now. So what we see here is basically a blog that has a number of different posts in it. And we can see that the posts have things like categories, recipes. They have things like ratings that might be a custom field or custom metadata. They'll also have things like these filters, right? So these might be also categories on the blog post. They might be some other sort of tag. There's some additional taxonomies here, like filtering by diets, filtering by cuisines. So this is just different ways where you can take the content on the page and make it more dynamic because it's filterable, it's searchable, and all that sort of stuff. But these lists of, pulling in all the list of the cuisines, pulling in the list of all the diets, pulling all that stuff, each one of these is more and more additional queries that have to be run on the page. An example, if I come up here, they even have the same sorts of different queries up here where there's additional filters, additional queries. And so a lot of times you'll see things that are pulled in multiple places on the same page, or it has to be pulled multiple times just to render a single page. So dynamic data is really about, this isn't something somebody just wrote the static code for. This is every little piece of the menu, of these filters, of the blog post themselves is, really adding up to hundreds of different database calls throughout the rendering of this page. So what or why is an object cache? Well, let's start with the problem. Complex database queries are slow, they're expensive, and they may have to be made multiple times on the single page load. You might be running the same thing over and over. You might be wanting to get the same data over and over. You might have a really complicated, query where you're getting your recipes, but you're filtering by multiple filters and taxonomies and ratings and different things like that. So these become expensive, they become slow. And the goal is to make the process of fetching all this data faster so that WordPress can build the page faster, especially in sites like this where that dynamic interaction is expected and you can't just, have everything statically cached. So the method that we use for this object cache, is we run the query and we take that big, result of whatever we got back. We save it in memory the first time. And then any other times that we go back for that same piece of information, we don't even have to talk to the database because it's sitting right there in memory. We've already run it once and it's waiting for you. And the solution for that, and this is part of WordPress core, it's called the WP object cache. So before we dig into the object cache and look at like a brief example of it, let's clarify what is not in an object cache. Number one, this is not about caching things like your CSS or your JavaScript. There are good reasons and tools for caching that sort of stuff. That's just not what an object cache is or related to. This is not about storing images in some sort of like CDN or keeping things, on different data servers, that sort of stuff. That's also just unrelated to an object cache, but still good, but good practices for performance. This is also not a page cache that saves the page that you're looking at as like static HTML. So there's a lot of good plugins in WordPress where they'll take your page and they'll just create a nice flat HTML version of it so that when people come to visit it, it loads super fast. That's great. There's a lot of good times where you can use that, but often with dynamic sites where you need a lot of filtering and interaction, that's not always going to be the case, because the minute somebody, changes some sort of filter or loads some obscure page, or maybe they're logged in or something like that, the whole thing of getting dynamic pages is that you probably couldn't generate the HTML for every single page. So page caches, caching assets, those are all great things and, come into play, but that's not specifically what an object cache is. The object cache is about getting stuff directly from the database or like external APIs and just keeping it ready in memory so you don't have to keep running to the database for the same sorts of stuff. So this is just a screenshot of the WordPress developer resources, and they have some good stuff sort of explaining the WordPress object cache and what it does and how it relates. And we'll kind of break down a few of these things. But what's most important is this area down at the bottom where we see these different functions. That's really how a developer interacts with the WP object cache. You really use functions like setting the cache and getting the cache. And so we're going to look at a real practical example of that. But there's some other additional functions here. And if you want to get deeper into understanding how it all works, you can definitely go and read the developer resources and kind of dig into a lot of the thinking that went behind this. So we're going to look at a really basic example in the wild. So let's go over here to our recipe blog, and we have this drop down where we pull in the cuisines. And the issue here is that we're going to pull this list of cuisines in multiple places because it's going to show up maybe as links in the footer and the header. And, maybe it's going to show up on different pages that I want to be able to filter and search. So I need to basically save myself from getting that from the database every single time. So here's an example of a function where we're going to get the cuisines. And there's two different things we're basically doing. One is that we're always going to check and see if it's in our object cache. So we're going to use WP cache get and just a little string that kind of like what we kind of named it, just a little special name that we came up with it. You might put a prefix in front of it or something like that. And then if it doesn't exist, then we'll go and actually run that whole query. And when the most important part, when we're done running, that WP query or whatever, we're going to set the results back in the cache so that the next time we go and get the cuisines, the next time this gets called, this will actually return something. It'll skip this whole place where we were doing our expensive query, and it'll just return the cuisines. So it's really important that, the object cache always kind of assumes that you're not going to be able to find the information and has the ability to go get the information for you. But you always, want to err on the side of, I hope I can get this information quickly and not have to run some expensive query, a WP query or get terms or something like that, each time that you want to get that list of cuisines. So this is where you'll see a lot of examples of WP Object Cache and kind of the way that you can just sort of store that information sitting just in the memory of your PHP application as WordPress is running and building the page. Okay. So question, doesn't WordPress do this for me already? And the answer is yes. Sometimes, sort of, unless if you're using custom database tables, if you're using functions like get posts, or you're writing any custom WordPress DB direct calls to the database, then you're going outside of the cache. In those cases, you really are responsible for doing this. Another example is if you're doing like searches and lookups, if you have very common searches that get searched on every page, or you're manually writing queries where you're using a search, or multi-dimensional queries where you're searching by, post meta and a taxonomy, and it's this really complicated query that you use. That anything that's not really like the main query of WordPress, whatever that current page is or archive is, those aren't really going to be cached. So you got to usually add those yourself. And then another example, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is if you're actually getting data from somewhere else, like you have an API endpoint that you always hit to get specific things. You have an e-commerce store, and when you want to get the tax rates for a specific zip code, you actually hit some other endpoint. So that data isn't being cached, but it's an opportunity to. That is something that you can do. So we'll get into that. But the next question is, how do I find these slow queries? So what I recommend doing, I do this on pretty much every site that I'm always working on. I download Query Monitor, a free plugin for WordPress, and I install it. And there's some other ones, I think Debugger, Debug Bar, there's different ones. I just like Query Monitor. I think it's the best and the simplest and the most powerful. And so what Query Monitor does is, among many, many other things, one of the things it does is it shows you all your queries, all the different database queries. So you can see in this screenshot that comes from their website, there's a bunch of different types of database queries happening, and they're showing you how many, and they're showing you how long they're all taking, and they're showing you which plugin or theme or where in core that it's actually happening. But they have other different things you can look at, like, are there queries that are duplicate that are happening multiple times? A great time to look into WP Object Cache. Sometimes if you have some slow queries, there will be a big red bar here that says slow queries. Those are queries to look at. Maybe there's something you can do there to optimize them and, maybe cache results, things like that. So this is a great place to look and see, like, what is taking so long on my website? Where can I move a little bit faster? So it's really great that the Object Cache saves some of these trips and stuff like that, but that's just in the context of a single page load. So every time the page loads again, all the data is fetched again. And obviously there's definitely use cases where you really want that to happen. So the question is, how long does an Object Cache last? It lasts a single page load unless there's two options here. Number one is a persistent Object Cache plugin, which means it persists over multiple page loads, which is really powerful, and we'll talk about it. And then there's something called the Transients API, which we'll look at very briefly. A persistent Object Cache means that the dynamic data stays in memory over multiple page loads. So if things aren't changing on the back end of your website, if the list of cuisines in the recipe is not changing, there's really no reason you can't cache it on a page load and then just use that again for the next person who visits the page, and so on. So a persistent Object Cache is something that you implement with a plugin, but it's also really connected to what kind of server you're hosting on. And in that case, it's really important to work with your host. So number one, Query Monitor, if you open it, it'll tell you if you have a persistent Object Cache, or if you don't, on the front, on like the main page of Query Monitor, it'll say persistent cache plugin not in use. If that's the case, check with your hosting company. They'll have one that they recommend, because there's different types of persistent object caches based on the type of server environment they use. But pretty much every good WordPress host will tell you which one, or have like their recommended solution for it. And the third piece about this is things are going to stay in the cache a lot longer. That's going to save you a lot. The downside is things are going to stay in the cache a lot longer, and you're going to have to be a little bit smarter about when do I clear the cache. If you've ever had that issue with a client where they update something, but the front end is not really updating, they got to clear their page cache. You kind of get a similar thing where you need to sort of be more intelligent about clearing out the cache if you know some data changes. What's really great about this is there's functions like those WP cache get and set functions that we talked about. There's functions that you can also use to tell it, hey, every time somebody saves this type of post type, flush the cache, something like that. So it's very doable. Otherwise, most hosting companies will recommend a persistent cache, and any recommendation will usually have a like flush cache button if you just manually need to. The other thing was that WP Transients API. Basically, this is a very similar thing to the WordPress object cache, but really the difference here is with the WP Transients API, if you have a persistent object cache, then they actually use the same stuff under the hood, so they kind of work exactly the same. But if you don't, it's another way to let things stay over multiple page loads. So say you don't have a persistent object cache, what WP Transients API will do is you can use very similar functions to the example that we looked at, but it'll actually store it in the database. And I know that sounds, well, what's the point? We were saving trips to the database. But think of it like I have some really expensive queries that have to look across multiple tables and they have to filter by terms, by postmeta and all this stuff, and it takes a long time. The Transients API, you can take all that and stick it in one row in the database, and it's a lot faster to get it back. And you can also set an expiration date. You can say like, hey, bring me this back, but if it's been in there for like more than a day, just get it fresh, delete it, and it'll respect that. So it's a great way to sort of have a little bit more control and say like, I don't mind if stuff sits in here for a day or two, but I don't want it longer. That's the Transients API for you. And I think the example use case you'll see this a lot for is external REST API references. So if you're trying to get some data from some other API or something that you use on your site, and you don't want to hit it on every single page load, you just want to hit it like once every 12 hours or something, you store it in the Transients API. It's going to sit there and you can set an expiration for it. So when you research the WP object cache, you're going to see a lot about Transients API. They're both great tools for data persisting across multiple page loads. So let's talk about some next steps, and there will be a Q&A in the chat. So first, I would say if you're working on sites with a lot of dynamic data, just download Query Monitor, put it on your site, and just look, do you have queries that you need to worry about? Are there duplicate queries? Are there expensive, slow queries slowing it down? It'll even tell you if there's like API calls that you're making, that are slowing you down. Sometimes plugins are always like doing things and they're slowing you down. So Query Monitor, just dig into it and explore. Check in there if you have a persistent object cache and if that's kind of good for your situation. A lot of times that solves a lot of issues for clients where they're just, things just feels like their site just takes forever to load, to turn on. It just like enter WordPress, WP admin. It's just like, why is this taking so long? So check with that, check with your hosting company. And then if you get to it and you actually have some custom code or something like that, then, optimize the code. You use those functions like WP cache, get, and set, and optimize, your site so that things load as fast as possible. If you have any other questions about this, definitely ask in the Q&A. I put a link in this slide right here. There's a free video series where I go over Query Monitor as well as some of the other tools that you would use for performance in that modern kind of WordPress environment. And thank you again for sticking around for Object Cache for faster dynamic data.
Guys, thank you for watching us. And we are waiting for you at our after party. You have a link to our after party in your emails, and you'll see it in our chat right now. Please join us. Everything is easy. You will see there a stage with the experts. I will be moderating the Discord community. So please prepare your questions, communicate, share your experience, share your question. Catch me if you can there. Bye-bye.